Chapter 280, Fujitora vs. Shi-Lu of the Rain, Part 4. Lafitte, fisherman, and the others watched the exchange with dark, calculating eyes. They leaned forward, intrigued by Shi-Lu of the Rain and the new arrival who boarded the ship with a serene smile. On his vessel, rank was earned strictly by merit. Aside from Sugar and Gears, whose unique abilities placed them outside the normal hierarchy, and Robin, whose position was guaranteed by special circumstances, every crew member had to prove their worth to claim a post. In fact, Nethan had briefly considered naming Admiral Fujitora as his first mate. After all, the Admiral's power surpassed even Shi-Lu's. Yet Fujitora had only just come aboard. Promoting him so dramatically, so quickly, felt hasty. The question of a first mate remained unresolved. Unlike ordinary officers, the first mate outranks all other lieutenants and holds full command of the crew whenever the captain is absent. It was a weighty responsibility, and one Nethan was determined not to assign carelessly. Fujitora's composed bearing and unfailing courtesy reassured Nethan. Still, entrusting so crucial a role required more than a single demonstration of strength. The captain would watch, listen, and consider every move before making his decision. For now, every eye on deck was fixed on the two formidable warriors, one seasoned by countless sea battles, the other shrouded in the mists of his rainfruit powers, each poised to strike the next blow in their silent, high-stakes contest. Facing Shiryu of the Rain's bold challenge, Admiral Fujitora paused and spoke deliberately. "Since you've eaten the ice fruit, by all means, show us what it can do. But this isn't the time or place. Let's get the ship moving first." Shiryu grinned, said nothing, and slid his heirloom second-generation Guitu blade back into its sheath. He cast a measured glance at Nethan and Lafitte across the deck. Nethan nodded once and ushered Robin into the cabin. With the captain's command, the ship slipped away from the island and into calm, open waters. Shiryu studied the sea for a moment. An unmistakable glint lit his eyes. Without warning, he leapt over the rail and dove into the waves. In an instant, his body was wreathed in pale frost. The very second his foot touched the surface, chilling energy radiated outward, freezing the sea into a broad sheet of ice. As a Paramecia-type devil fruit ability, the ice fruit cannot rival Alogia's natural elemental reach. The frozen zone wasn't vast, but it was more than enough to serve as a makeshift battlefield. Nethan's recent breakthroughs have brought him to the very heart of the ice fruit's power, trading long-range finesse for an unbearably frigid and brutally powerful close-quarters strike. While his usual technique of imbuing sword chi with frost remains relatively mild at a distance, when he fully lights the fruit's power, every inch of his body and blade plummets toward absolute zero. In a face-to-face duel, that means each clash of steel could send jagged shards of ice racing through an enemy's guard, freezing muscle and bone in an instant. Picture two swordsmen locked in rapid exchange, then one blade suddenly chills to 100 degrees Celsius, the shock of impact carving off frost even as it severs flesh. From the deck's edge, Admiral Fujitora stared down at the sea. A solid sheet of ice stretched to the horizon. He drew in a measured breath, exhaled slowly, and then deliberately dropped through the frozen surface. Meanwhile, Nethan adjusted his grip on a smoldering cigar, yanked his sword from its scabbard, and stood half-frozen himself, crystalline frost webbing along his coat and hair. The transformation was complete, yet controlled. The cigar remained intact this time, its embers glowing defiantly against the cutting cold. Nethan's lips curved into a cold smile. The real fight was just beginning. Fujitora's expression remained utterly calm, no hint of the fury Shiryu of the Rain had so suddenly unleashed. Slowly, he leaned forward and gripped the hilt of his wooden sword. With a soft hum, the blade slid free. In a single, fluid arc toward the heavens, Fujitora unleashed a strange energy. It shot upward in a brilliant streak, pierced the cloud line, and vanished into the blue sky above. Fisherman, Lafitte, and the others watched in stunned silence. When they realized what he'd done, they all tilted their heads back and exchanged puzzled glances. They could feel that Fujitora had sent some intangible power aloft. But to what end, they had no idea. Shiryu of the Rain likewise looked up, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Then that uncertainty turned to astonishment. Far overhead, a tiny crimson spark had streaked into view, blazing through the sky from who knew how far away and hurtling directly toward the battlefield below. "A meteorite," Shiryu gasped, his face draining of color. Fishermen and the others shared his shock, their eyes fixed on the fiery dot that raced ever closer. Nethan of the Rain stared up at the roaring meteorite hurtling toward them. Its power was unbelievable, as if the heavens themselves had ripped open. Summoning the chilling energy of his cold fruit, he drew his sword in one smooth motion. With a single, icy slash, he cleaved the flaming rock clean in two. Arcane frost spread outward, quenching the blaze, but gravity paid it no mind. Both halves plunged earthward like twin bombs. "Nethan, watch yourself," Fujitora warned, bracing alongside him. Nethan's gaze went steely. "Sword net," he called, unleashing a rapid flurry of strikes. Glittering blades of blue-white energy intertwined in midair, forming a vast crackling mesh that shredded the first fragment into 1,000 shards. At the same moment, Fujitora swung his own blade against the second half. A shockwave of sheer force met the falling mass, and for a heartbeat, the two powers staved each other off. Then, boom! The remaining rock exploded into powder. The fragments rained down onto the frozen plain, smashing the brittle ice beneath with deafening thunder. When the roar finally died away, the shattered surface lay in ruin, frost and debris strewn for yards around. Nethan and Fujitora exchanged a breathless glance, each realizing how narrowly they'd turned back disaster. Nethan braced himself as a hail of ice shards pattered against the ship's hull. Before the frozen fragments could accumulate, fishermen drew in a steady breath and flung a handful of peanuts into the spray. On impact, the nuts exploded the ice into harmless bits. Lafayette, Luo, and the rest of the crew followed suit, tossing debris to shatter every last shard until the deck ran clear. Nethan looked upward just in time to see Shiryu of the Rain drifting above them, his foot tracing an ethereal arc in midair, a silent moonstep. Directly opposite him, Admiral Fujitora stood balanced on a rotating disk of ice, equally suspended by his gravity-bending powers. "I have to admit," Shiryu called out, his voice steady, "I underestimated you, Admiral. Among those blessed with keen sight, few rival your strength. My little trick with insects was hardly worth the effort, though I'm pleased it brought you some amusement." Fujitora allowed himself the ghost of a smile. He had already gauged Shiryu's raw power, but determining the Blackbeard pirate's true limits would take more than a passing skirmish. Likewise, Shiryu acknowledged Fujitora's might, yet the full depth of that strength remained a mystery to both. Without warning, Shiryu's eyes flashed. "Ice blade! Extreme cold!" he roared. In an instant, a crystalline sword, frosted to nearly -150 degrees, formed in his hand. The blade cut through the air, a streak of glittering blue-white as it lunged straight for Fujitora. Fujitora's expression never wavered. He lifted his cane sword, condensed gravity along its edge, and sent the concentrated force hurtling toward Shiryu of the Rain, who was charging him without hesitation. "Gravity blade!" boomed the impact. This was no tentative feint. It was a full-on frontal assault. Shiryu met it head-on, blending his massed, full swordsmanship with the bone-deep chill of the Leng fruit. A frigid hockey aura shimmered around him, capable of freezing anything it touched. Yet Fujitora's gravitational mastery was equally formidable, funneling immense weight into a single slashing plane and warping the air around it, an effect not unlike Nethan's own distortion fruit power. Crack! Crack! The ice-covered ground beneath them splintered into shards. A massive shockwave ripped outward, sending frozen fragments and blasts of icy wind sweeping across the battlefield. Nethan refused to remain on the sidelines. He thrust a hand into the empty air and activated his distortion fruit ability, bending space itself to absorb and redirect the force of the blast. When the wind died down and the ice dust settled, only Fujitora and Shiryu remained standing. Not a single frostflake clung to Fujitora's blade or cloak, and he showed no sign of damage. The clearing was eerily silent, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Nethan stood before Admiral Fujitora, feeling every crease in his own threadbare coat as if it were a scar. The Admiral's uniform was impeccably pressed, every fold and line a testament to his discipline, while Nethan's clothes hung limply, worn from countless battles and sleepless nights. He met Fujitora's gaze, trying to steady the churn of adrenaline in his veins. He'd known the Admiral was powerful, but nothing had prepared him for the sheer force radiating from the man with the vision fruit. If Nethan could unlock the full potential of his rain fruit, perhaps he might someday stand toe-to-toe with Fujitora. As things stood, though, a life-or-death duel against this level of strength was grimly one-sided. His chances of winning hovered below 40%, more likely around 30%. And yet, despite the odds, Nethan refused to back down. Chapter 281, Tea Party, Part 1. "Let's call it a day," Nethan said, leaning on the ship's railing as he watched Shilio of the Rain and Admiral Fujitora lock eyes in midair. Even without the ice fruit, Shilio had been almost as powerful as Fisherman, still a notch below true admiral level. Gaining the ice fruit wouldn't have launched him straight into admiral ranks. Rather, it would have placed him somewhere between Fisherman and an admiral. Had Shilio been stronger, he might have prolonged the fight against Fujitora. But now, the difference in their strength was plain for all to see. "Remarkable," Fisherman muttered under his breath. He'd assumed Fujitora's power would top out at his own level, at most on par with Shilio, but never had he expected Fujitora to so decisively eclipse Shilio. This was undeniable admiral-grade strength, perhaps even enough to challenge an admiral head-on. On this ship, Nethan was the only man who could hope to go toe-to-toe with Fujitora. Nearby, Shiryu of the Ume cast a disdainful look at Fujitora, snorted in irritation, and drifted down to the lower deck. He wasn't at all happy about being outclassed. Admiral Fujitora remained perfectly composed. He slid the blade into his wooden cane and then eased himself back onto the deck. "All right," Captain Nethan said in a steady voice, "let's set course for the New World." He cast a brief glance at Fujitora, then left the deck and disappeared into the stern cabin. Fujitora nodded once and tapped his cane lightly on the deck. A deep rumble shook the ship as his gravity powers activated. With a thunderous crack, the ice that had suspended them splintered, and the vessel shot forward through the sky under Fujitora's silent guidance. In the past, only Nethan had managed to pilot the ship in midair. But with an admiral of the Marines at his side, the young captain was content to hand over the hard work. After all, it wasn't every day you got such powerful backup. News of the Ghost Hand pirates' sudden appearance in the first half of the Grand Line had spread quickly. Both the world government and the Navy were well aware of it, but neither was willing to commit serious forces. Confronting a pirate fleet under the protection of a Yonko would be prohibitively costly. At best, they issued a standing alert and readied dispatch ships, more show than substance. All the while, whispers about Captain Nethan's uncanny talents grew louder. As the Ghost Hand, he had repeatedly demonstrated an almost preternatural calm, even when forced to retreat before 4 of the Navy's strongest fighters. That cool-headed precision only deepened the mystery surrounding him, and made every Navy officer who heard his name tighten his grip on his sword hilt. Nethan had come to realize that the most formidable pirate crew he might ever face was the Ghost Hand pirates. He sailed all the way to the Sabaudi archipelago, deliberately scuttled his ship offshore, then doubled back around Fishman Island, and on the way he spotted the White Star vessel, which had certainly grown since he'd last seen it. Still, it would be years before the bubble-casting shipyards there were fully up and running. The round trip, from the New World into Paradise and back, took him nearly 4 months. In all that time, the New World lay eerily quiet. The 4 emperors each held their own domain without so much as a skirmish between them. But every sailor knows that a calm sea often hides a brewing storm. Beneath the surface, dark currents were already gathering strength. Strangest of all was the Ghost Hand pirates' claim to the title of 5th Emperor, despite having no territory to call their own. It was an odd kind of power, an emperor without a throne, and their actions left no doubt they respected neither law nor custom. In truth, this uneasy peace was nothing more than the lull before a hurricane. When the storm finally breaks, will its source be Kaido, Big Mom, or the Ghost Hand pirates themselves? Speculation is rife about where the Ghost Hand pirates will strike next. In the New World, the E4 emperors have already claimed all the prime territories, leaving no room for challengers. If the Ghost Hand pirates truly aim to rise to the rank of the 5 emperors, they must confront one of those titans directly. Their clash with the 100 Beasts pirates was merely the opening move. But seizing territory from any emperor is no small feat. These rulers of the New World answer to no one, not even the world government or the navy dares oppose them. Though the seas have been eerily calm for 4 months, the ghost hand pirates have never faded from public attention. Every morning, countless readers flip through newspapers, hunting for any rumor of the crew's next maneuver. Just when the world seemed to brace for a brewing storm, the Big Mom pirates, one of the 5 emperors, sent out a summons that sent shockwaves across the Grand Line. Charlotte Linland's notorious tea party. In the New World, few invitations carry as much dread. The sea was growing wilder than ever before. Storms of unusual fury battered every coast, and rumors spread that the legendary 4 emperors who had long carved up these waters had just become 5. But more urgent than shifting tides or new pirate alliances was one inescapable fact. Big Mom was hosting another tea party. No one in their right mind dared refuse her invitation. Those bold or foolish enough to ignore it were never heard from again. Their names have long since been lost to history. Nethan, leader of the underground network, massaged his temples in exasperation. The moment the summons arrives, you have no choice but to attend. And you must bring Big Mom's precious treasure box, a gift so perilous that a poorly chosen offering might as well be a death sentence, while something too lavish risks a debt that can never be repaid. Across town, Morgans, the head of the Grand News Agency, stirred his tea thoughtfully. "How many of these tea parties has it been now?" he murmured, gazing up at the slate-gray sky. For years the 4 emperors had ruled the sea. Now there were 5. Yet Morgans knew all too well that even the greatest empires can crumble overnight. This tea party, who could say how many more will survive? Nethan slipped the invitation into his coat and let Morgan's parting warning echo in his mind as he made his way back to the island's grand hall. Out on the shoreline of Fishman Island, the afternoon sun danced across the water as Nethan tossed gentle waves at Princess Shirahoshi. She giggled each time a droplet caught her by surprise. They'd been playing like this for nearly an hour when Robin arrived, her expression serious. "News from Kaku and the others," Robin announced, holding up a rolled parchment. "Big Mom's fleet is on the move. They're hosting another of her infamous tea parties." Nethan straightened, curiosity flickering in his dark eyes. He jumped down from the rock he'd perched on and strolled toward Bai Xing, the giantess who lounged nearby. Though nearly twice as tall as Robin, Bai Xing's skin was fair and flawless, something even the Empress herself could envy. Nethan clambered up onto Bai Xing's broad shoulder, settling in as she propped her head on one hand. "The Empress? Big Mom?" Bai Xing drew a neat circle in the sand, her tone innocent. "Who's she?" Robin offered a wry smile. "She's one of the 4 emperors, arguably the most terrifying pirate alive. That tea party of hers is the next big threat we have to deal with." A shiver ran through Shirahoshi's slender frame. "Terrifying," she whispered, voice trembling. Nethan chuckled and ruffled her hair. "Ignore Robin's dramatics. Big Mom might have a fearsome reputation, but she's just an old lady with a sweet tooth." He winked at both of them. "Seriously, how scary can she be?" Robin rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a small grin. Bai Xing smiled down at Nethan, curiosity still shining in her pale eyes. Together, the 3 friends turned back to the sparkling sea, undeterred for now by the looming shadow of the next great adventure. Bai Xing still trusted Nethan implicitly, and Robin's presence reassured her somewhat, yet she remained fragile. "Why go after her?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What did she do?" Nethan tilted his head, offering a calm smile. "She wronged Hireding and the others. Big Mom once razed Hireding's hometown to the ground." He glanced at Bai Xing, letting the weight of his words sink in. At the time, Hireding and his fellow giants were living on Murloc Island. Shirahoshi met them there once. She was completely awestruck by their size. That's terrible," Shirahoshi whispered, her tone soft and hesitant. Though her words hinted at sorrow, there was no anger in her voice, just a gentle sadness. It was as if by nature, the mermaid princess felt everything but fury. Chapter 282, Decision, Part 2. As twilight deepened, Nethan floated gently away from Shirahoshi's shoulder, offering her a serene smile. Bai Xing bowed in acknowledgement, and once Shirahoshi departed, Nethan alighted beside Robin. Together, they strolled along the winding paths of Dragon Palace City's garden. "I intend to make Murloc Island my domain," Nathan said, eyes gleaming with resolve. "But first, we must clear these seas of the Big Mom pirates and deal with the local bandits. Right now, the Whitebeard flag flies over that island. To raise my own banner, I'll have to challenge Whitebeard's forces directly. In doing so, the four emperors will feel my impact across the ocean." Robin matched his stride effortlessly, unfazed by Nethin's bold ambitions. She'd long since grown used to his grand proclamations. In fact, she'd find it strange if he ever kept his plans to himself. She let out a soft chuckle. "And how do you suppose the Big Mom pirates will react? Another tea party invitation, perhaps?" A slow, confident smile curved Nethin's lips, and a sharp light flickered in his eyes. "I haven't received an invitation yet, but I'm quite certain they'll welcome me all the same, for better or worse." Robin laughed again, her eyes bright with anticipation at the adventures to come. Nethin plucked a gemstone from the coral beside him and held it up to Robin's form, scrutinizing every detail. Yet no matter how he manipulated it, the gemstone transformation fell flat compared to Robin's natural features. With a frown, he slid the gem back into place. He reached out and gently lifted Robin's chin, his gaze sharpening. "Is that any better?" he asked. Robin's painted-on expression didn't change. Instead, she offered a small, knowing smile, then stepped back so Nethin's fingers missed their mark. In an instant, the entire figure of Robin shivered, dissolved into a swirl of petals, and vanished. It had been nothing more than a clone spun from the flower fruit. Nethin's outstretched hand froze in midair for a moment. Then he shook his head and let his fingers curl back. If he'd used his haki, his observation, he would have spotted the ruse immediately. But he hadn't. He inhaled softly, activated his observation haki, and scanned for Robin's real aura. The trace led him straight to Dragon Palace City, where Robin was staying with Granrose. His expression eased into calm satisfaction. With a single thought, he vanished from the reef and reappeared on the path to Dragon Palace City. Fishman Island Beach lay quiet under the midday sun. Two sleek ships of the Ghost Hand pirates moored side by side at the dock. On board one vessel, the central hall featured two lacquered sofas flanking a set of wooden chairs, while a massive round table stood ready to receive guests and secrets alike. The cabin's layout was almost laughable in its simplicity. A gigantic sofa that swallowed half the room, two custom-made compact chairs, and a round table so oversized it looked more like a banquet setting. In front of them sat a dainty coffee table, so small it seemed out of place. Scattered across its wooden surface were dozens of wanted posters, each one impaled by a dagger to keep it from sliding off. All of them had come from the Big Mom pirates, listing every pirate with a bounty exceeding 100 million berries. Beside each face was a terse summary of their known abilities, intelligence files pieced together by Rhodes and his network. They called the compilation the Steel Balloon Report, but as Shilyu of the Rain scoffed, its pages were filled with crooked melons and cracked dates, useless scraps of information at best. Shilyu took a long drag on his cigar and eyed the pinned posters with contempt. Nethin, meanwhile, methodically flipped through the stack. He paused at each portrait, committing the details to memory, and then jotted corrections in the margins with a fountain pen. Very few names managed to catch his attention, and even fewer impressed him. As the soft glow of lantern light danced across his notes, it was clear Nethin trusted his own instincts far more than any so-called official report. On the coffee table lay the usual lineup of bounties, a handful of Marines' top commanders and pirates like Perospero and Owen, each carrying rewards in the 400 to 500 million berry range, plus dozens more wanted posters. But at the very center of it all was something different, a lone photograph of Charlotte Bling. No bounty circled her portrait. Instead, thanks to the peculiar properties of the memory fruit, Nethin had ordered Kaku to procure her image and mark it specially. Law reached out and gazed at Bling's face, lost in thought. Memory, after all, was the seat of one's will. With the power to tamper with memories at will, Bling's ability could mesh disturbingly well with Law's own room-based mind exchanges, and, in a broader sense, it even bore a distant resemblance to Granosa's child fruit. The implications were unsettling. Nethin tapped the last dossier, straightened in his chair, and then gave a sharp nod to Lafitte and the others. Study every detail, commit it to memory. Having foreknowledge of an enemy's powers was an advantage no pirate, or pirate hunter, could afford to ignore. Even with Admiral Fujitora on their side, the Ghost Hand pirates could easily overwhelm the Big Mom pirates, but Nethen refused to overlook a single detail. He'd accept no unnecessary losses, neither among his own crew nor the enemy's. Fujitora sat motionless, his eyes hidden, yet his presence spoke volumes. In every respect, the Ghost Hand pirates operated more like a disciplined military force than a band of cutthroat outlaws. Where other pirate crews thrived on chaos, this one functioned with precision and order. Shiryu of the Rain studied the wanted poster for General Star Katakuri, his sharp eyes tracing the cryptic notes beside the bounty. He murmured to himself, predicting the future with observation hockey, could it really work that way? He straightened, fully aware that if anyone could stand against them, it would be Katakuri. While everyone else remained absorbed by the poster's details, Robin leaned in toward Fujitora. "Admiral, would you like me to help?" Fujitora gave no audible reply, but Robin knew the ship held countless ways to compensate for his blindness. Whether it was mind exchange surgery for undercover surveillance, a temporary body swap, or simply using the Operation Fruit alongside the Healing Fruit to restore his sight. She only needed to know which option he preferred. Fujitora offered a small bow. "Sorry for asking you to sift through Xing's files just now." Robin returned his bow with a cool, reassuring smile. "It's no problem." She didn't press him for details about his eyes. Nethen had already filled her in, and unless Fujitora volunteered more, she saw no reason to pry. Nethen fell into step beside her. "So," he asked, "how's the cloak coming along?" Robin glanced at Fujitora before answering. "In the Navy, every officer above lieutenant wears what they call the Cloak of Justice. CP0 agents under the world government even have a special white cloak of their own. Pirates, though, were a lot more chaotic. None of the 4 emperors share a uniform, and the Ghost Hand pirates still don't have any signature attire." Nethen felt a twinge of impatience. Their crew needed an identity. Together, they'd toyed with coats, hats, even full body wraps, but in the end they chose something simpler, a black shoulder cloak. It was easy to wear, easy to produce, and it carried just the right air of mystery. When Shiryu of the Rain saw a sample, he gave it his seal of approval, and the rest of the crew agreed. Everything else was too complicated, Robin concluded with a half-smile. This strikes the perfect balance. A cloak is the perfect traveling companion. Light enough to carry anywhere, it folds up with a single tug and comes off just as easily, never getting in the way of combat when draped over your shoulders. It should be arriving any moment now. Robin looked over at Nethen and said, "It's smart. It would be delivered at any time." Chapter 283, Cloak, Part 3. Just as the last syllable of the voice faded, a small trolley rumbled through the hall's doors. Atop it sat Granos, her legs crossed at the calves and a stack of sugary treats cradled in her arms. 2 attendants guided the cart across the polished floor, coming to a halt beside Nethen. He looked up from his place, then rose and approached the trolley. Inside were neatly folded cloaks, jet black in every size imaginable. Along each hem ran a fine thread of dark gold embroidery, a signature flourish from Fishman Island's most renowned costumer. With a nod, the attendant slipped back and exited the hall. Granos hopped down, her brow immediately furrowing as she surveyed the collection. "They're awful," she muttered, folding her arms. "Who would wear these?" She was the lone dissenter, but opposition was useless. The majority had spoken, and besides, her favorite color, verd green, wasn't even under consideration. Nethen glanced at the candies in her hands, then reached out and tapped her lightly on the forehead. "Noted," he said with a half-smile. "Ow!" Granos shot him a glare, one hand coming up to rub the spot he'd tapped. "Seriously, they're hideous." Nethen picked up one of the cloaks, letting its soft fabric fall through his fingers. "I think they're perfect," he declared. "Strong without being flashy, exactly what we need." Shiryu, known as the Rain, stepped forward with a cigar between his lips. He grabbed a black cloak off the rack, gave it a brisk shake, and held it up to his shoulders. It wasn't exactly to his taste, but he had to admit the workmanship was solid. He chuckled softly. The merfolk on Murloc Island really know their tailor's trade. Lafitte was next. As someone who relied on cloaks for his missions, he examined the fabric and stitching with a practiced eye. This one was far superior to his usual gear. He draped it over his shoulders, gave himself a once-over in the mirror, and nodded in satisfaction. Trafalgaro merely shrugged, took the cloak assigned to him, and returned to the coffee table. He spread out the dossiers on the Big Mom pirates, scanning the profiles with detached interest. At the end of the rack, only one cloak remained. Robin tried it on, but it swallowed her slight frame, too long, too loose, all wrong style. She hesitated over the smallest size, then turned away in frustration. Nethan watched her for a moment, then stepped forward. "No refusals," he said firmly. He didn't expect her to lead the charge in battle, but she had earned her place in the crew, and with it, her cloak. Nethan thought back to what the garment represented. To wear the Ghost Hand Pirate's black cloak was to be an official member, a trusted cadre. In their entire crew, only the giants Helding and Gertz had ever made their own cloaks, proof of the rare honor and responsibility each cloak carried. Nethan surveyed the assembled troops. "Giants are too large for our standard cloaks," he explained, "so instead we'll choose 2 representatives, the leader of the giant corps and 1 healing fruit specialist." Rhodes and the others exchanged eager glances. No one objected. After all, this was the very first cloak issue, and they knew there'd be more opportunities in the future. To them, wearing Nethan's cloak was proof of his approval, and they'd fight their hardest to earn another. With that, Nethan picked up the smallest cloak and draped it over Setang, who immediately stiffened and tried to wriggle free. He couldn't help but chuckle. The little girl's emerald green hair spilling over the black fabric was so absurd it looked like a stage costume. No wonder she was protesting. A few paces away, Granu stepped up to a mirror, muttering to himself with a sour expression. He tugged at the cloak around his shoulders. "Cute, huh?" he grumbled under his breath. Behind him, Robin's lips curved into a satisfied smile. Her taste ran toward the unconventional, and she genuinely thought Granu looked adorable. For once, though, he didn't share her opinion. Nethan let out a soft chuckle. "Stow it away for now. You don't have to go head on, and you certainly don't need to wear that thing. If you hate it, just keep it hidden." But his voice turned serious. "Don't lose it to me, because if you do, you'll be the one getting cleaned up." Hearing she could ditch the hideous contraption, Xiao Tang's head bobbed up and down like a little rattle. Nethan's features then smoothed into calm resolve. After a beat of silence, he said, "All right, let's move. We're heading into Big Mom's territory, the land of the 10,000 nations. More precisely, Whole Cake Island." Their party, guests from the underworld, stepped ashore at a bustling dock. Whole Cake Island, the beating heart of the 10,000 nations and the stronghold of the Big Mom pirates, greeted them with dazzling sights and the hum of celebration. Thanks to the power of the Soru no Mi, soul fragments had been woven into inanimate things, flowers, trees, streams, even grains of sand, bringing them to life. These animated creations, called homies, flitted everywhere, serving as guides, porters, and companions. Escorted by homies and members of the Big Mom pirates, the newcomers wound their way through candy-striped avenues toward the grand cake castle that dominated the island's center. Below the cake castle, the courtyard buzzed with laughter and merriment. It felt less like the territory of the 4 emperors and more like a scene straight out of a fairy tale. At that moment, a polished carriage drew up before the castle gates, and the horses slowed to a halt. The door swung open, and a small procession of guests stepped onto the cobblestones. First down was a heavy-set, middle-aged man clad in a deep green velvet coat. Tiny round spectacles perched on his nose, a jagged scar marred his cheek, and a lit cigar hung from his lips as he advanced with measured, deliberate steps. Whispers rippled through the onlookers. This was Duffield, the underground financier whose networks controlled nearly 30% of the world's illicit lending. That someone of his notoriety had received an invitation only deepened the air of intrigue. A heartbeat later, a tall figure followed. Black hair flowed over broad shoulders like a mane. A crisp captain's coat draped his frame, and he moved with the calm assurance of a man used to command. Arms folded across his chest, he surveyed the courtyard with cool, appraising eyes. This was Umit, the self-styled king of shipping, one of the newest emperors of the underworld. He had attended this gathering once before. Now, for a rare second time, he had returned at the summons of a mysterious host. The castle doors opened wide, and a hush fell over the assembled crowd as these two titans of the underground world stepped across the threshold. What awaited them inside, no one could say, but every soul present felt the weight of expectation. Many in the underworld dread Big Mom's tea party, but at the same time, it's the ultimate mark of prestige. Affiliated with the Big Mom Pirates, the gathering admits only those whose standing is high enough to earn an invitation. It may look like a whimsical social call, but beneath its sweet veneer lies the underworld's most important networking event, a summit where crime lords and kingpins forge alliances, make deals, and measure one another's power. Think of it as the grandest ball the surface world's nobility never sees. At the entrance stood the fabled Cake Castle, its spires and ramparts sculpted from sugar and cream. As the carriage doors swung open, a hush rippled through the crowd. A tall figure stepped out, cradling a slender bottle of vintage wine. He looked up at the candy-coated fortress with genuine awe. Word spread instantly. Lord Kipperson had arrived. Revered or feared for controlling more of the underworld's commerce than anyone but the late Doflamingo, Kipperson now reigned supreme in every illicit market from arms to information. Whispers followed in his wake. After Doflamingo's downfall, Kipperson had quietly absorbed the rival's territories, until virtually all underwoy RLD dealings passed through his hands. The pale glow of the castle's frosted walls reflected in his eyes as he paused on the drawbridge. Even among this gathering of elites, none commanded respect, and a hint of apprehension, like Lord Kipperson. And yet, on this sugary battleground, the real question lingered in every mind. Who would outmaneuver whom over tea and cake? Thanks to the pact he'd forged with the Big Mom Pirates 2 years ago, Nethan had earned himself a rare invitation to the legendary tea party. As the massive warlords stepped down from their gilded carriages, the surrounding retainers gasped and whispered among themselves. This was Big Mom's tea party, one of the 4 emperors of the New World, and nearly every underground overlord, every self-styled emperor of the underworld, had assembled here. Chapter 284, Everyone Joins In, Part 4. Late afternoon sunlight dappled through the candy-colored spires of Cake Castle as the assembled guests strolled toward its grand entrance. The much-anticipated tea party was still an hour away, so there was no rush, just time enough to admire the castle's intricate icing filigree and the giant sugar roses lining the walkway. Nethan fell in step beside Umit, who glanced casually over his shoulder as if sizing up the crowd. Ahead of them, Trand, known throughout the underworld as the Shipping King, spotted Umit and broke into a broad grin. "Well, if it isn't Umit," Trand called, striding forward. "I didn't expect the great Umit to know my name." Umit inclined his head coolly. "I've heard of your reputation," he replied, "always open to new partnerships." The corner of Umit's mouth twitched into something resembling a smile. "Maybe I'll call on you for a favor soon. Drop me your comm capsule number." "Consider it done." Trand produced a slim data chip and handed it over. In the underworld, connections were currency, and neither man wasted the chance to strengthen his network. Nearby, Morgans and Kibson chatted amiably with a few other prominent figures. Trand excused himself from Umit and crossed over to greet them, sharing handshakes and nods that spoke of past dealings and mutual respect. But as he rounded the group, his eyes caught movement at the edge of the procession. A lone figure stood beneath an ebony cloak, face hidden in deep shadow. Time seemed to pause as Trand stared, struck by an odd familiarity. Who was this mysterious stranger? He couldn't place the features, but the pull of recognition tugged insistently at his mind. Tea party or not, Trand knew something about that cloaked figure was going to change everything. He stepped closer, curiosity burning behind his eyes, unaware that fate had just taken a sharp turn at Cake Castle's gates. At that moment, Umit and the others noticed Trander's strange stare. They turned to look in his direction, and froze. A lone figure in a black cloak stood apart from the 5 people who had stepped off the carriage. "What?" Kibson blinked, rubbing his eyes. "There were only 5 of them. Where did this 6th person come from?" A chill ran through the group. If they'd been anywhere else, some bright fairy tale kingdom, they might have leapt to their feet in astonishment. Here on Cake Island, shrouded in mist and rumor, they dared only watch in fearful silence. The cloaked man let out a low, sinister laugh. Then, with deliberate slowness, he tilted back his wide-brimmed hat, revealing the face beneath. A stunned hush fell over the onlookers. Morgan's jaw dropped, his eyes went wide. You're the demon sheriff," he gasped. As a long-time observer of the Ghost Hand Pirates, he recognized Lafitte the moment his features appeared. Morgans felt his heart pound and his stomach twist. This was Cake Island, and its dark sands had just claimed a far more terrifying presence than any of them had bargained for. The moment Lafitte drew near, a ripple of shock ran through the gathering. Devil Sheriff of the Ghost Hand Pirates, here! Even the so-called emperors of the underworld stiffened at the name. Ghost Hand Pirates at Big Mom's tea party? In Arabian Nights? It was unthinkable. Nearby, a cluster of Big Mom pirates caught sight of Lafitte's dark silhouette and went pale. They shouted in alarm, stumbling back as Kibson and the others immediately melted into the shadows. This was no ordinary intrusion. No outsider had the standing to intervene when emperors were about to clash. From his post beneath Cake Castle, Baron Eggy thundered forward, eyes blazing. "Devil Sheriff Lafitte, what are you doing here? You're not on the guest list for this tea party." Lafitte tilted his head, a slow, crooked grin spreading across his face. He slipped a hand inside his cloak, then gently tipped up the brim of his top hat, as though to reveal a secret no one had dared to imagine. "How I got here," he said softly, "is a bit of a long story." Baron Eggy's expression went ice-cold. "Mother's been itching for an excuse to make your life miserable," he snorted, "but I never expected you'd waltz in here of your own accord. Ever since the Ghost Hand Pirates first set foot on Elbaf, Big Mom's patience has worn paper thin. Just what do you think you're doing?" Lafitte gave a careless shrug. "We're not here to start a fight. We just want to attend today's tea party. Only, we don't have an invitation. Think you could help us out?" Eggy's eyes flicked between Lafitte and the carriage behind him. When he caught Lafitte's use of "we," his grip tightened on the hilt of his weapon. "We? Who else is with you?" His tone sharpened as he scanned the area, every muscle poised for attack. At that moment, the door of the black-cloaked carriage swung open. A lone figure stepped down and strode forward with deliberate calm. In his hand gleamed a curved demon knife. Tears streaked his cheeks, but his gaze was unwavering. He stopped before Eggy, took a steady breath, and spoke in a quiet, measured voice. "I am the death surgeon, Nethan." Eggy's eyes widened in shock, his posture tensing further. "There's more of you. What are you scheming by sneaking onto Cake Island uninvited? Is anyone else hiding nearby?" As soon as Baron Eggy's shout cut through the air, dozens of Big Mom pirates spilled out of Cake Castle, many of them high-ranking officers with bounties of 200 or 300 million. No sooner had Eggy finished calling than a small black-cloaked carriage came to a halt nearby. Its door swung open, and one by one the Ghost Hand pirates emerged. First was Robin, the crew's intelligence officer, who stepped down with a graceful smile, her eyes taking in the growing crowd. Beside her appeared Fisherman, their crack sniper, who seemed to materialize out of thin air before settling into a steady crouch, a confident smirk playing on his lips. Behind them, Shiryu of the Rain strolled out. Puffing on a thick cigar, he exhaled a plume of smoke directly at the Big Mom pirates, as if issuing a silent challenge. Lastly came the man known only as Smiler, leaning lightly on a slender wooden staff. Wrapped in the same black cloak as his comrades, he advanced with measured steps and spoke in a calm, even tone. Towering behind the group was Hayardin of the Giant Corps, his immense frame blotting out the sun as he joined the others on the field. In an instant, the two pirate forces stood face to face, Big Mom's fearsome cadres against the deadly precision of the Ghost Hand pirates. A jagged flash of lightning split the sky, and in that instant, Hayardin materialized on the field as though torn from another world. His immense frame was swathed in a sable cloak that billowed around him like a gathering storm. Meanwhile, at the very heart of the assembled warriors, the air itself quivered. A concentric ripple spread outward, subtle as a pebble's drop, yet undeniable. From that distortion emerged the captain of the Ghost Hand Pirates, Nethan. He stepped through the wavering veil with unhurried grace, his ebony cloak settling neatly around his shoulders. He faced the crowd with composed, unreadable eyes. Silence fell. Only the whisper of wind stirred the banners overhead. Baron Eggy, who had worn a mask of unshakable severity, now stood frozen, cold sweat beading on his brow. The arrival of Fisherman and Shiryu of the Rain had already rattled him. Nethin's appearance erased the last trace of confidence from his gaze. At his side, Giberson Morgans and the other nobles watched with hearts pounding like storm-tossed waves, disbelief flickering in their eyes. Though neither Nethin nor his crew raised a weapon or flared their ki, the sight of those all-black cloaks felt like the very herald of death. The onlookers drew back instinctively, each breath tightening in their chests. Nethin lifted his chin. His voice rang out, calm, cold, and utterly certain. Ghost Hand Pirates, advance. Chapter 285, Ghost Hand and Big Mom. The throne room fell into an eerie silence. Clad in a black cloak, Nethin strode toward the castle of cakes, his calm gaze fixed on Baron Eggy, who blocked the way. A bead of cold sweat trickled down the Baron's temple. Each breath felt like a struggle. Baron Eggy knew better than anyone the vast gulf between his own strength and that of the Emperor's, especially Big Mom herself, and now this formidable newcomer. He stood rooted to the spot, unable even to lift a finger. Creak, creak, came the echo of clogs on the polished floorboards as Admiral Fujitora followed directly behind Nethin. In the hush, that lone sound stretched out, heightening the tension. All across the hall, the Big Mom pirates froze. Weapons hung limply in their hands. Their backs were slick with sweat. Not one dared step forward. They all sensed the same truth. Something monumental was about to happen. Including Morgans and the others, every heart in the courtyard thundered as if about to burst from their chests. They all watched Nethin and his black cloak crew step one by one into the cake castle. It wasn't until Nethin himself slipped through the great door that the crushing, mountain-like pressure finally began to ebb away. Ghost. How did the Ghost Hand Pirates even get here? Kibson muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. The ale he'd been drinking suddenly tasted like water, and he was fully sober in an instant. Beside him, Duran's voice trembled. Are they here on business? But it doesn't look like negotiations. Morgans forced himself to stand a little straighter. He was still tense, his pulse raced, but excitement flickered in his eyes like a torch. Whatever it is, he said under his breath, it's going to be huge, unprecedented. Inside the cake castle, every member of the Big Mom Pirates, from seasoned officers to raw recruits, froze at the sight of Nethin. The Black Cloak Pirates advanced in perfect silence, their presence alone enough to cow the entire garrison. Not one soul dared to step forward to stop them. Those homies, souls like Gate and Stare among them, were utterly powerless against Nethin's uncompromising will. Bound by his coercion, they climbed without a sound to the very summit of the cake castle. At the top, the famed open-air pavilion awaited. Big Mom, Charlotte Linlin, stood there with her most trusted generals, Katakuri chief among them, already aware of every disturbance below. Overhead, dark clouds swirled ominously, as if heralding the chaos to come. Nethin paused before the ornate door. With a single indifferent push it swung open. The guard on duty, his face once brimming with arrogant confidence, went ashen under Nethin's cold stare, the hinges whining in protest. Inside lay the grand tea party chamber. Rows of tables groaning beneath mountains of pastries, frosted cakes, and confections in every shape and hue. But the usual air of celebration had vanished. Instead, a heavy, suffocating stillness pressed down on the assembly, snuffing out any hint of laughter. Nethin stepped through the threshold, his gaze sweeping the stunned faces around him. His voice, low and measured, cut through the silence. I didn't expect you to join my tea party. At the center of the grand hall, bathed in the warm glow of countless lanterns, Big Mom rose to her feet. She turned toward Nethin and his companions, her lips curving into a broad, almost motherly smile. What a splendid gathering, she announced, her voice carrying over the hushed crowd. Welcome, Ghost Hand, and you, Nethin. Directly behind her stood her four most trusted lieutenants, Katakuri, Smoothie, Cracker, and Snug, each flanking her like living statues. To Big Mom's left assembled the Charlotte family's heavy hitters. Pelospero, her eldest son, Owen, her fourth, the Minister of Ice Cream, the Minister of Cheese, and several others whose reputations alone could command respect. On her right were Combert, her eldest daughter, Daifuku, her third son, the Minister of Butter, and the Minister of Nuts, each bearing bounties in excess of 300 million. Not once did anyone flinch at the sight of the Ghost Hand Pirates, one of the 5 emperors, standing before them. Instead, every face was solemn, every posture impeccably straight, as if the entire top floor had been choreographed for this very moment. Big Mom waved a gloved hand, a playful glint in her eye. "Forgive my oversight," she admitted, "but I never got around to sending you an invitation." Undeterred, Nethin took 2 measured steps forward until he stood before an ornate table laden with delicate pastries. He reached out, plucked a dainty tart from the platter, and bit into it. The sweet, flaky crust melted on his tongue, an appreciative hum escaping his lips. That single, composed gesture was enough to shatter the silence. From somewhere in the crowd, a voice finally rose, trembling with a mixture of awe and disbelief, as everyone realized they were witnessing something far more extraordinary than they had ever imagined. Chapter 12. Shadows of Elbaf. Pelospero, the eldest son of the Charlotte family, glared at Nethin with narrowing eyes. "Ghost Hand," he snarled, "what are you doing here?" Nethin met his stare coolly and said nothing. Pelospero's impatience hardened his features, but before he could retort, the looming figure of Big Mom, Charlotte Linlin, shifted her gaze from Nethin to a cloaked giant standing nearby. The giant's black mantle swallowed all light, but his voice cut through the tension like a blade. "You're Helding," Big Mom said, surprise flickering in her eyes. "I didn't expect you to remember my name." Helding's tone was as cold as ice. "How could I forget?" he replied. "You were on Elbaf with me as a child, never a member of the Lamb House, never my ally, but you were there. You destroyed our town. You killed our hero, Yoruru. I've carried that memory with me every day since." Big Mom's expression darkened. The rough wooden buildings of her childhood home, now ash and ruin, flashed through her mind. She let out a low, humorless laugh. "So you speak for the giants of Elbaf now?" Helding drew back his hood, revealing stern, unyielding eyes. "I am no longer just a giant," he said. "I serve under the banner of the Ghost Hand Pirates. But my loyalty to Elbaf remains unchanged. We will never forgive the atrocities you committed." Silence fell over the clearing as Big Mom studied him, the weight of past sins pressing between them. Nethin shifted at her side, ready for whatever would come next. Big Mom didn't look angry, she just laughed. Turning her gaze on Nethin, she asked with a deceptively gentle smile, "So you've come to stir up trouble today?" The warmth in her tone belied a chill menace that ran through every onlooker. She wasn't flaunting arrogance, but her status as one of the 4 emperors was intimidation enough for any ordinary pirate. Nethin inclined his head in acknowledgement and answered in an even voice. At that calm response, the non-Big Mom pirates who'd been invited to the tea party broke into a cold sweat. They swallowed hard and instinctively edged back. From Big Mom's challenge to Nethin's quiet reply, it was clear what was coming next, an emperor-level showdown. The Ghost Hand Pirates versus Big Mom's fleet. They'd come expecting tea and polite conversation, and now they were about to witness an imperial clash of titans. Some guests felt so oppressed they wished the earth would swallow them whole. Others, though trembling, leaned in with morbid curiosity. "Are we here to watch, or to die in the crossfire?" One whispered to his companion, cold sweat beading on his brow. "This is the battle of emperors." Even the mighty heads of the Dark World's great houses, each bearing a storied name and lineage, felt as fragile as flat-bottomed skiffs in a howling storm, ready to capsize at any moment. Yet they couldn't look away, captivated by the unfolding spectacle. Chapter 286, The Roar of Thunder, Part 2. "Not bad. It seems Kaido hasn't been enough to make you suffer," Big Mom snarled, her eyes narrowing to slits. An oppressive aura pulsed from her like a living thing, rippling outward in every direction. In the next heartbeat, she snatched the tiny cloud lingering overhead and crushed it in her hand. Instantly, it swelled into a roiling, ebony thunderhead, alive with crackling violet lightning. "Don't think you can take me down just because you beat Kaido," she bellowed. With that, she drove her arm forward, and from her outstretched fingers erupted a savage bolt of lightning, hurtling straight toward Nethin and the others. The thunderclap was deafening, and purple arcs of electricity danced across the sky, illuminating hundreds of meters of battlefield in an instant. The sheer force of that strike, This was no ordinary devil fruit attack or hockey-infused blow. It was the raw, unbridled power of an emperor of the sea. No, the might of one of the 5 emperors, Big Mom herself. Hidden in the shadows, the leader of the dark underworld watched in stunned silence. His heart pounded as he murmured in awe, "Her power, it surpasses even legend." Yet even he knew this was only the beginning. Almost the instant the purple bolts began to dwindle and vanish into the void, a blinding burst of white lightning tore through the center of the tempest. In an eye blinking, it swallowed the fading purple arcs, surging outward with overwhelming force and even cleaving straight into the roiling dark clouds above. From below, it looked as if a shaft of pure light had pierced the sky itself. "The boss's thunder! It's been devoured!" gasped the junior commander of Big Mom's pirate crew, disbelief etched across his face. "Is that even thunder?" Clad in crackling white energy, Hiredin towered before Big Mom, his eyes cold and disdainful, like a god surveying mere mortals. With a single motion, he hefted his colossal lightning-charged gauntlet skyward. His voice boomed across the battlefield. "Now behold true thunder. Wanlei, heavenly prison." At his roar, the blackened heavens erupted into a maelstrom of white bolts, as if the entire firmament had transformed into a raging sea of thunder. Moments later, the sky ignited in a furious storm, thunderbolts crashing down on the cake castle like relentless battering rams. Each bolt blazed thicker than a water column, shaking everyone to their cores. "Ghost Hand Pirates, Hilding the Thunder Giant." The Dark Forces leader shrank into a corner, his voice barely a whisper of terror. Beside him, an underling stared upward, face ashen. "No mistake, it matches our intel exactly. That's the natural thunder fruit at work." The natural thunder fruit, renowned as one of the closest things to an invincible devil fruit power, rivaled only by legendary abilities like the natural disaster fruit. Boom! A deafening thunderclap tore through the air, scorching the upper ramparts of the cake castle in a choking wisp of smoke. Electric arcs snapped and danced across the battlements, zeroing in on Big Mom and her lieutenants. Stray bolts lanced outward, turning the entire rooftop into a roiling sea of crackling energy. Nethin watched in stunned silence as the last arcs of thunder crackled away into the air. When the brilliance finally faded, the survivors dared to look toward the blast epicenter and discovered the Big Mom pirates were far from finished. From the swirling smoke and debris, an army of identical giants emerged, towering biscuit soldiers, each brandishing a scorched shield. Though their shields were blackened and cracked, they'd done their job, absorbing the full force of the lightning bolt and protecting the pirates clustered behind them. One shaken crewmate pointed a trembling finger and whispered, "That emblem, Star Club, they're Big Mom's men." "Not just any underlings," another added, voice cracking with relief. He's one of the sweet commanders." Suddenly the name clicked. "Cracker, the 1,000-armed general. Bounty, 860 million berries." A wave of hope swept over the battered sailors. Brother Cracker had arrived just in time. From within one giant biscuit soldier, Cracker himself stepped forward, looming over the ruined ground. High above him, Helding hovered, wrapped in a storm-dark mantle of crackling energy. Cracker tilted his head, his voice calm and strangely composed. "You wield a lightning power strong enough to swallow my mother. You must have eaten the legendary Thunderbolt fruit." Nethin clenched his fists, anticipation and awe warring in his chest. The true nature of their enemy's power was finally revealed, and the battle was far from over. "Consider yourself lucky, big guy, but raw strength alone doesn't give you the right to bark orders," Helding sneered. Drawing on the fearsome power of his Thunder Logia fruit, he stood ready. In the Ghost Hand Pirates, only Nethin and Admiral Fujitora rivaled his mastery of lightning, and Helding had come armed with detailed dossiers on the Big Mom Pirates generals. Cracker was at the top of that list. "With all the star power you claim," Helding continued coldly, "let's see if you can actually back it up." He stretched out his hand and tugged at the very air around him. Darkness rippled, then exploded into a blinding flash as he shaped the electricity into a glittering spear. In an instant, the crackling javelin of pure lightning hurtled straight for Cracker's real body. Cracker's biscuit shell form staggered as he realized Helding had pinpointed his true flesh. His eyes widened, then narrowed in angry determination. With a swift motion of his sword, he summoned a massive shield, an impenetrable wall of hardened cookie dough, to intercept the attack. Boom! The lightning spear struck the biscuit barrier with shattering force. The thunderous blast tore through Cracker's defenses, cracking and splintering the cookie shield until fragments rained down like brittle hail. Cracker gritted his teeth and swung his sword to one side, trying to deflect the residual bolts of electricity that sizzled through the air. For a tense moment, lightning and sword clashed in a storm of sparks. Each crackling arc tested Cracker's resolve and confirmed Helding's unshakable confidence in the power of the Thunderfruit. Shiryu of the Rain watched Hilding and Cracker's hands drift into position, then snorted through the stub of his cigar. Enough games. Let's begin. A steely light flickered in his eyes as he slid the second-generation ghost from its scabbard, the blade gleaming with an otherworldly chill. In a single, fluid motion, he slashed at Big Mom's forces. Ice Blade style, EI. The ghostly sword energy tore through the deck, cleaving tables and chairs asunder. A blizzard of frost roared outward, coating everything it touched in a layer of white so thick it looked like freshly fallen snow. Palospero, Oven, and the others fell silent, horror etched on their faces. The ghost hand pirates. Shiryu of the Rain, they whispered, realizing that even at range this attack was merciless. Any foolhardy soul who tried to block it would be maimed, if not worse. As that frigid wave of power barreled toward Big Mom herself, the very floor beneath them began to writhe and groan, as though some hidden force was stirring awake in the depths below. A low, threatening rumble rolled outward, and then the ground convulsed violently. The castle's stone floor gave way in an instant, softening, bulging, then molding itself like hot mochi into a colossal, cube-shaped fist suspended in midair. Its surface gleamed with a dark purple tinge of armament hockey that radiated raw intimidation. Boom! Nethin's blade, shrouded in crackling frost, slammed into that enormous fist. Ice spread across the surface so fast the entire mass turned white with cold. A violent crack split the fist's center, but even as it cleaved through, the mochi-like punch shattered Nethin's frosty surge, scattering razor-sharp shards of ice in every direction. Pastries and drinks littering the chamber froze solid on contact, transforming into sugary ice sculptures and D-cubes. Across the hall, Shiryu of the Rain watched the display with a measured calm. He steadied his own sword horizontally before him, his narrowed eyes flicking from the shattered ice to the towering arm of congealed mochi. Whoever blocked his attack so effortlessly stood just behind that enormous fist, and now Shiryu knew exactly who it was. Charlotte Katakuri, an all-star of the Big Mom Pirates and the fearsome wielder of the awakened mochi fruit. His bounty, 1,570,000 berries. Chapter 287, Fujitora makes his move, third update, versus another king. I won't let you near her, Katakuri vowed, his gaze locked on Shiryu of the Rain. He hadn't shown an ounce of surprise. His domineering confidence, bolstered by his future sight, had anticipated every twist and turn long before it happened. Shiryu of the Rain flashed a dangerous grin. With a heavy thud, he planted his feet so hard the ground cracked beneath him. Raising his blade, enveloping it in the 6th Navy Assault Style's notorious cutting aura, he gripped the second-generation ghost in his hand and surged forward like a thunderbolt. Katakuri didn't flinch. Instead, he moved a fraction of a heartbeat sooner, closing the distance between them. His arm writhed and swelled into a massive mace, its surface wreathed in dark purple hockey. With a savage roar, he swung downward, aiming to shatter the very earth at Shiryu's feet. In raw hockey power, Katakuri was every bit Shiryu's match, and perhaps even superior to him. His arrogance belied the fact that, though Shiryu was faster, Katakuri's ability to foresee his rival's moves more than made up for it. Yet, when it came to pure, unbridled force, Katakuri's strike still lacked the lethal edge that Shiryu's blade could deliver. The two kings clashed in an explosion of hockey and steel, each determined to emerge victorious. Nethin watched from the sidelines as two of the Big Mom Pirates' deadliest fighters squared off. On one side stood Shiryu, wielding the snow fruit. On the other, Charlotte Katakuri, master of the mochi fruit. From the start, the match was impossibly close. Even though mochi doesn't succumb to cold the way ordinary substances do, frozen rice cakes simply harden rather than shatter, the snow fruit still held a slight advantage. That extra stiffness in Katakuri's mochi constructs, once chilled, gave Shiryu the edge he needed, yet the gap between them was razor-thin. In Nethan's estimation, Shiryu's odds of victory hovered around 60%, just a hair better than Katakuri's. "This is the first time I've ever seen Brother Katakuri in a real head-to-head fight," Nethan murmured, his eyes fixed on the swirling flurries and quivering mochi. Around him, the rest of the crew watched in grim silence. Within Big Mom's fleet, Katakuri was practically a living legend, second only to the Empress herself. A hulking fishman standing nearby tossed a peanut into his mouth with a dissatisfied grunt. "That Shiryu really stole my match," he complained. "I had my eye on Katakuri. With the speed of the quick fruit, I'd have dealt with him before he even knew what hit him." He cracked his knuckles, eager for the clash. "Even if Katakuri can glimpse the future, there's no way he could react fast enough to my assaults. All I'd need is one opening to pin him down for good." Nethan couldn't help but smile at the swagger. Yet, as the battle intensified, snow swirling into thick flakes, mochi fists bursting through the swirling storm, he realized no one could take Katakuri lightly. Even against a fellow top-tier devil fruit user like Shiryu, the despot of sweet command was proving why he'd remained undefeated for so long. And in that frozen dance of ice and dough, Nethan knew only one thing for certain. This fight would end in fireworks. Shiryu of the Rain had intended to finish off the slightly weaker commander, Star Smoothie, and would have done so swiftly, if only he weren't locked in a fierce duel with Katakuri. With their strengths so evenly matched, neither could gain the upper hand in a hurry. Reluctantly, Shiryu could only leave Smoothie to wait. Meanwhile, Fisherman shook his head in frustration. He pulled a handful of coins from his pocket, aimed at the massed ranks of Big Mom's pirates, and let them fly. Destruction cannon! The moment the coins left his hand, they ripped through the air, shattering the sound barrier with a thunderous crack. Then they slammed into the enemy lines. Boom, boom, boom! Explosions rocked the deck as some pirates fell under the blah. Stat, others raised their arms in a desperate shield, but the unlucky few were hurled flying by the sheer force of the impact. "Damn you!" Samuji roared, eyes blazing with rage, and charged at Fisherman. He knew all too well that if Fisherman wasn't stopped right now, the sharpshooter would unleash an even deadlier barrage. Fisherman arched an eyebrow as Smoothie charged toward him. "You'd better think twice." "You'll never catch me," he taunted. In the blink of an eye, he blurred into a phantom shape, whipped out his revolver, and unleashed a rapid volley of shots. Smoothie, the second sweet commander, might not be as fearsome as Katakuri, but his training was second to none. With an icy glare, he twisted sideways and slipped between bullets. "Is that all you've got? Let me show you real speed," he retaliated with a thunderous boom. In an instant, Fisherman and Smoothie were locked in a dazzling exchange of gunfire and devil fruit powers. At the same time, Katakuri squared off against Shiryu of the Rain, their blows sending shockwaves through the air. On the opposite side of the top floor, scores of Big Mom pirates swarmed Trafalgar Law, Lafitte, and Robin. The trio formed a tight circle, countering blow after blow, but the sheer number of attackers bore down on them. Swords clanged, hockey flared, and the room rang with the roar of battle as they struggled to hold their ground. In a hidden alcove, leaders of the underground watched the carnage unfold. They exchanged stunned, whispered remarks as they gazed up at the chaos consuming the Cake Castle's pinnacle. The Big Mom pirates had completely repelled the Ghost Hand pirates' assault, and they were only getting started. Even among the underworld's most notorious figures, none had ever witnessed a clash on this scale, let alone in person. This was Big Mom's home turf, and the Ghost Hand's pirates were already on the ropes. Not only Nethan and Big Mom herself, one observer murmured, eyes wide, but our top players, Shiryu, the Rainbringer, and the Fisherman, have been pinned down by her Yonko commanders. Trafalgaro and half the others fell to sheer numbers alone. We're watching them fight for survival. Worse yet, Big Mom hadn't even committed one of her full generals, her trump card, into the fray. Meanwhile, outside the walls of Cake Castle, Rhodes and his army of sand giants had clawed their way through the defenses and were now pressing upward relentlessly. Still, on Big Mom's home ground, even that unstoppable Sand Legion seemed unlikely to tip the balance. After all, The four Empress's forces were overwhelming. Beyond her four top commanders, Big Mom had four more lieutenants with bounties north of 500 million belly, and over a dozen more between 300 and 500 million. No matter how fierce the sand giants fought, it was hard to see how the Ghost Hands pirates could ever hope to turn the tide. The true terror of an emperor's power was on full display. Just look at the forces under her command. The Big Mom pirates still outclassed the Beast pirates by a wide margin. If they smashed their way in only to flee, they would lose every scrap of face they had left. Murmurs ran through the crowd. Some recalled how the Ghost Hand pirates had once driven the Beast pirates back, though none knew the full story. What everyone assumed was that the Beast pirates hadn't suffered heavy losses, and, crucially, they had been the ones on the offensive. But that clash hadn't taken place on Beast Island. Now they stood within Big Mom's base during her infamous tea party, where every ship in her fleet was gathered. A battle at this scale was not something to be taken lightly. Amid the low hum of uneasy conversation, a sharp-eyed crew member spotted someone new beside Nethan, the towering figure of Admiral Fujitora. He leaned over to a companion and whispered, "Who's that? I've never seen him before. Could he be a fresh recruit of the Ghost Hand pirates?" Nethan shook his head in disbelief. He'd never heard of this man, Fujitora, and if the rumors were true, the newcomer couldn't even see. A lind man wearing the black cloak of the Ghost Hand pirates and exercising authority over battle-hardened sailors? It made no sense. Fujitora lifted his head serenely. His milky white eyes saw nothing, yet there was no hint of uncertainty in his posture. Calmly, he rested both hands on the hilt of his cane sword. Then, with a sudden, deliberate motion, he drew the blade and thrust it skyward. A ripple of unseen power shot from the sword's tip, carving through the air above them. For a moment there was only tense silence. Then, without warning, blazing fireballs began to rain down from the heavens. Meteorites, born on the force Fujitora had summoned, crashed around the ship in a deafening roar. Nethan's heart pounded. This blind swordsman commanded a power that none aboard had anticipated. Chapter 288, Meteorites Rain Down, Fourth Variation. A stunned hush fell over the crowd as Admiral Fujitora slowly drew his blade and pointed it skyward. For a moment, no one moved. Then, one by one, they lifted their eyes in bewilderment. High above, 3 tiny sparks of light appeared against the blue dome of the sky. Within seconds, those pinpricks of radiance swelled into blazing streaks, hurtling straight toward the earth. "Meteorites!" someone gasped. "Is this for real?" In the hidden alcoves of the Cake Castle, the leaders of the Dark Forces cowered in shock. If these flaming rocks struck, the entire fortress could collapse in an instant. There would be nowhere left to hide. And it was all unleashed by a blind swordsman. Even the Big Mom pirates, famed for their ruthlessness, found themselves paralyzed by fear. None had suspected that Fujitora, this quiet, one-eyed admiral, could command such devastating power. As the 3 fiery masses grew ever closer, every soul in the plaza braced for cataclysm. Snug, the last of Big Mom's commanders, who had yet to act, stared in horror at the 3 blazing meteorites hurtling toward them. It was far too late to wonder how Fujitora had summoned them. Now they faced only one choice: how to stop the onslaught. He was confident he could deflect a single rock, maybe 2 if he strained every ounce of his power, leaving Owen and the others to handle the third. But as the fiery projectiles closed in, Snug's heart sank. They were falling at the corners of an impossible triangle. No matter how fast he moved, he couldn't block more than one at a time. Panic rippled through the Big Mom pirates. Shouts of alarm echoed across the battlefield, and countless faces twisted in terror under the scorching glow. "Sweet barrier!" Pelospero roared, his eyes widening. The eldest Charlotte's son brandished his candy-coated scepter, activating his devil fruit ability. A translucent sugar crystal shield blossomed before him, crackling with energy. With a thunderous impact, one of the meteorites slammed into Pelospero's barrier. The candy shield shattered instantly, melted and splintered by the fierce heat, raining fragments down as the meteor continued its deadly fall. For a heartbeat, all was still save for the crackle of dissolving sugar and the ominous roar of the blazing rock descending toward them. Daifuku, the Charlotte family's 3rd son, froze the moment he saw the meteor hurtling toward the Cake Castle's summit. With a sharp intake of breath, he pressed a hand to his side and exhaled a plume of swirling smoke. In midair, the smoke coalesced into a towering demon, like a lamp genie come to life, brandishing a colossal blade. The candy barrier that Nethan and the others had erected had already sapped much of the meteor's momentum. Seizing the chance, the demon swung its great knife in a single devastating arc and cleaved the rock apart at its midsection. Even in two pieces, however, each fragment of the meteorite still thundered downward with enough force to level the top floor of the castle. Chaos erupted among the Charlotte family's ranks. Dozens of officers scrambled to respond, firing volleys of cream cheese blasts and streams of whipped butter into the air to stall the fragment's descent. For a tense moment, sticky globs of dairy rained around the falling meteorites, slowing their plunge ever so slightly. Then came the impact. Boom! Both halves smashed into the battlements, creamy butter and whipped cheese splattering across the parapets. The entire upper tier of the cake castle shuddered violently, as though it might buckle and collapse beneath the assault. The first meteorite had been intercepted, but the other two, still speeding toward the fortress from different angles, threatened an even greater disaster. In that instant, the castle teetered on the brink of ruin, slammed by three unpredictable stones from the heavens. The fragments of the meteor were easy enough to shatter, but stopping their downward force was another story. The second chunk plunged toward Starsnag with deadly speed. Only his desperate burst of energy prevented it from crushing him outright. The third piece, however, came barreling down like a jagged bullet, unstoppable. At that critical moment, a compact figure sprang into view. Nethan, the Big Mom Pirate's master chef, vaulted skyward, sword raised. In one fluid motion, he drove the blade into the flaming rock. The meteor's flight stuttered, then slowed to a crawl. Seconds later, under the astonished gaze of everyone below, the smoking hunk of rock flattened, its jagged edges melting away until it looked like a giant slab of buttered bread. With a soft thud, the colossal toast settled on the top terrace of the cake castle. A cheer rose up instantly. "We're saved! It's Master Chef Nethan!" Whoever stood nearby among the Big Mom pirates released the breath they'd been holding, faces flushed with relief. They had weathered the catastrophe, thanks to their chef with the longest loaf in the Grand Line. Nethan had been the very first to pledge himself to Charlotte Linlin, Big Mom, and the only man to personally nurture her rise, guiding her from childhood into the life of a pirate and helping her claim her place as one of the four emperors. Now, the same chef who had astonishingly transformed a falling meteorite into a slab of warm, buttered bread rolled onto his creation and gazed up at Admiral Fujitora with deadly seriousness. "We've got trouble coming, Linlin," Nethan murmured, voice low but urgent. Within the Big Mom pirates, every crewmate called Charlotte Linlin their mom. Only her former husband was bold enough to use her given name. Though Big Mom had witnessed the meteorite's descent, she hadn't raised a finger to stop it. Nethan's presence before her demanded all her attention, and she studied him with narrowed eyes. Admiral Fujitora inclined his head in respect. "I confess, I didn't expect your subordinates to be so formidable." Nethan offered a calm nod. "Big Mom's children are certainly strong," he agreed. "Thankfully, none of them inherited her iron balloon physique." He paused, recalling the old legend. When Linlin was only 5, she shattered the blade of the giant hero Yoruru with a single swing and killed him outright. Her strength, it's unlike anything the world has seen. Just as Yorulu warned, Big Mom may look human, but in truth she's an evil deity trapped in mortal flesh. If her monstrous constitution could be inherited by future generations, the world would long since have fallen under Charlotte's iron rule. At that moment, 4 colossal figures emerged to confront the Big Mom pirates: the sand giant Rhodes, the metal giant Statham, the iron giant Goldbigu, and the biochemical titan Yura. Together, they formed an impenetrable line between Big Mom's forces and our allies. The tide of battle finally shifted from the brink of defeat to a tense stalemate. Meanwhile, Chef Longbread and Star General Snag stepped forward to challenge Admiral Fujitora. Both are powerful in their own right, but Longbread's years have begun to show, and Snag, though one of the 4-star generals, is still the youngest of the bunch. Alone, neither stood a chance against an admiral's skill. Only by combining their strengths could they hope to keep Fujitora on the defensive. Seeing our side hold firm, Nethan calmly eyed Charlotte Linlin, Big Mom herself. Her enormous frame towered over him, yet he showed no fear. With a steady voice, he called out across the field. "So it's come to this. Shall I claim your head next, Big Mom?" The beastly pirate queen merely laughed, a low, dangerous rumble that sent a chill through the air. "Oh ho," she replied, amusement flickering in her eyes. "You've got spirit, little one, but do you really think you can take me on?" And with that, the battle resumed. An epic clash of titans, each side determined that only one would walk away victorious. The woman's lips curved into a knowing smile as she fixed her gaze on Nethan. "Many have come for my head," she said softly. "Yet in the end, they all swore themselves to me as homies. Your soul, Netha, N, is just as formidable. You could create a homies stronger than any I've ever seen." Her voice trailed off, and in the next heartbeat, she lifted her arm toward the sky. Lightning flickered across her fingertips as she reached up and seized the very edge of the sun. With a single, effortless tug, she yanked it down from the heavens. The star's brilliant light collapsed into a molten sphere of flame that coiled around her wrist like a living cuff. "Skyfire," she whispered, and the blazing halo of sunlight answered in kind. Chapter 289, Flying with One Punch, Part 1. Boom! A torrent of scorching flames roared down, consuming everything around Nethan and gouging deep blackened craters into the earth. At first, the members of Big Mom's crew let out triumphant cries, but their cheers died in their throats as a sudden chill swept over them. Through the inferno strode Nethan, completely unscathed. Not a singe marred his clothes, not a wisp of smoke curled from his hair. He was standing right in the heart of the blaze, yet somehow seemed to exist in another plane, immune to its fury. Big Mom's eyes narrowed as she stared. Nethan returned her gaze with a cold, steady light in his amber eyes. In an instant, he unleashed the power of distortion. The void around Big Mom began to twist and writhe, the very air rippling like a storm-tossed sea. Every distortion converged on one point, her neck. This was no ordinary slash. It was a rift in space itself, aimed to sever her head with impossible precision. "Shenwei!" Nethan's command thundered as the distortion surged outward. Big Mom, ever proud and unperturbed, felt no warning, until the world itself bent around her. She realized too late that something was terribly wrong. The space that once held her solidly was turning to liquid shadow, ready to snap shut at any moment. Nethan's eyes narrowed as a jet-black haze of armament hockey snapped into place around Kaido's upper body. As one of the four emperors, Kaido's hockey was without peer, potent enough to twist the fabric of space itself, even folding space within space into a crushing vice. Stronger than Nethan had anticipated, yet he showed no outward surprise. Calmly, he murmured to himself, "He's unleashing that new long-range technique, distorting distant space to strangle his opponent before they even see it coming." This move was a recent innovation, devastating at a distance, but it sacrificed raw power up close and couldn't be layered with Conqueror's hockey. Against foes who'd perfected armament hockey, or Loja users who could turn their bodies into elemental forms, its effects were negligible. However, anyone lacking innate elemental abilities, or those who hadn't deeply cultivated their hockey, would find a single misstep fatal. The warped space collapses so abruptly that victims are crushed and obliterated in an instant. So this was Kaido's latest ace up his sleeve. Intriguing and dangerous. Big Mom brushed a hand over her uninjured neck, lips parting in a cruel, predatory smile aimed straight at Nethan. Then, with a sudden burst of motion, she charged. She wasn't as quick as Kaido, her bulk working against her flexibility, but Nethan didn't flinch or dodge. Instead, he balled his right hand into a fist. The air around it warped, and he struck. At the exact same instant, Big Mom's fist rocketed toward him. Boom! Their fists met in a cataclysmic outburst of inky thunder that ripped through the void and tore a jagged crack across the storm-darkened sky, as though some great celestial mirror had shattered. This was no ordinary clash of strength. It was a raw contest for supremacy among the five emperors. Crackling waves of overbearing power surged outward, whipping the battlefield into a devastating hurricane. The nearby members of the Big Mom pirates were caught in the shockwave and hurled backward in an instant. Even the highest-ranking officers of Big Mom's crew reeled backward, drenched in cold sweat as two colossal wills collided in the air. A domineering presence. The same ironclad authority I'd felt in my mother. It seems he truly inherited her. General Smoothie, locked in a brutal duel with Fisher Tiger, halted mid-strike, inhaled sharply, and cast a wary glance toward Nethin. "He's one of the 5 emperors," she murmured. "It's only natural he exudes such sovereign force." At first, no one blinked when those twin auras flared, but the instant they met, the clash shook the heavens and the earth. Nethin's indomitable will and Big Mom's raw, tyrannical power interwove in a seismic wave, casting a palpable shadow over everyone on the battlefield. Fortunately, most of that world-shaking energy remained trapped between the two titans. Only slight tremors reached the surrounding skirmish. Had Big Mom unleashed her full overlord might unopposed, even her own crew would have crumpled under her fearsome roar. Nethin's blow detonated in a flash of inky thunder that ripped through the void itself, as if tearing the darkness into jagged fissures of raw power. For nearly 20 seconds, that terrifying energy crackled and roared around them, then abruptly died away. Seizing the moment, Nethin lunged, his fist shot forward like a piston. Boom! Big Mom staggered under the impact. The ground beneath her shattered into fragments. She gathered every ounce of her monstrous strength to resist, but Nethin's twisting strike drove her back, inch by agonizing inch, until at last she went crashing down. Spinning through the air, Big Mom became a living battering ram. She tore through the battlefield, gouging a deep, dark chasm in the earth. With unstoppable momentum, she rocketed into the outer wall of the Cake Castle's top floor, then hurtled onward, plummeting toward the town below like a falling meteor. "Mother!" Smoothie gasped, her cry mingling with the stunned exclamations of allies and enemies alike. No one had expected this newcomer's very first confrontation with Big Mom to end in the Yonko's headlong ejection. Hidden in the shadows, the leaders of the dark forces exchanged horrified glances, witnessing, in that single moment, a legend unseated. They had expected a stalemate, perhaps even assumed Big Mom might be on the back foot, yet none could have predicted her being overwhelmed. Charging in headlong, that was the unmistakable power of one of the 3 calamities among the 4 emperors. This was a woman who had single-handedly taken on 4 of the world government's mightiest naval divisions and even clashed toe-to-toe with Kaido. Some whispered she might even outclass Whitebeard's legendary monsters. "Don't worry, Mother's fine." Katakuri's low cry cut through the chaos rippling through the Big Mom pirates. His usual cool confidence cracked as he watched in tense disbelief. Big Mom had been hurled through the air by Kaido's full force, blasting straight off the battlefield, and yet, when she landed on the deck below, there wasn't so much as a scratch on her. Now, more than ever, she proved herself a true monster among emperors. Apparently, she had never once taken serious harm. Her body was impervious. They'd even nicknamed her frame the Steel Balloon. In terms of raw physical defense, she stood shoulder to shoulder with Beast Kaido. Her soul fruit powers were formidable, but the real terror lay in her unbreakable flesh, almost as if a demon itself dwelled within her. Chapter 290, Shaking Heaven and Earth, Second Change. This candy-colored castle is an eyesore. Having blasted Big Mom aside, Nethin glances down at the sprawling confection beneath his feet. He sees that she's unharmed, and he couldn't care less. Fairy tale fantasies aren't his style. If Fishman Island resembles an earthly paradise, fine. But even after wiping out the Big Mom pirates, he'd reshape the place entirely. As for this saccharine fortress, it has no future here. The gathered spectators stare in horrified fascination as Nethin lifts a single hand, his expression calm and unreadable. From his palm flows a writhing, twisting energy that pours over the castle like a dark waterfall. The distortion force surges outward, wrapping the town-sized structure in invisible coils. With a low, resonant groan, the castle's foundations buckle. Walls writhe, turrets bend, and entire wings begin to spiral upward and apart. Stone and sugar confections crack and crumble, towers topple. In moments, the regal cake castle is reduced to shattered fragments, tumbling into a ruin of twisted spires and molten frosting. And just like that, it's gone, an unwanted relic vanished by Nethin's will alone. Katakuri's eyes snapped wide as he foresaw what was coming. His pupils shrank to pinpoints and he lunged toward Nethin, only to be halted mid-stride by a flash of radiant steel from Shiryu of the Rain. What on earth is he going to do? Even without Katakuri's future sight, the others felt a sudden, inexplicable dread. Their hearts pounded, a chill crept up their spines, and every pair of eyes in the vicinity turned toward Nethan. Below the castle, in the town beyond the walls of the great cake castle, Morgan and his crew watched in stunned silence. Morgan's face went pale when Big Mom hurtled upside down out of the sky, smashing through rooftops and sending debris flying. He barely managed to open his mouth before the colossal fortress above him began to contort. As though gripped by invisible hands at its base and peak, Cake Castle twisted and groaned. Rumble! The layers of the castle spiraled around each other in a terrifying, writhing coil. Inside, homies and countless members of Big Mom's pirate crew were trapped in the crush, instantly crushed beneath Nethan's devastating power. For a heartbeat, the town fell utterly silent, its people paralyzed by shock at the sight of the once invincible fortress, reduced to a grotesque twist of stone and icing. At the summit of the Cake Castle, utter chaos reigned. Under Nethan's command, warriors like Luo, Robin, and the towering giants hovered effortlessly, each either capable of flight or utterly unafraid of plummeting heights. They watched impassively as the fortress's walls buckled and twisted beneath them. Below, the Big Mom pirates cowered in terror. The city, our castle, this power, it's unreal. Even veteran lieutenants, Owen and Daifuku, and General Star Smoothie stood frozen, jaws agape. A single strike from Nethan had almost shattered an entire stronghold, Ghost Hand. Just as the old ramparts sagged toward their final collapse, a bone-shaking roar split the air. From the courtyard, a roiling thundercloud erupted, rising like a living thing. Atop that storm bank hovered Big Mom herself, lightning crackling around her fists. Her blazing eyes locked onto Nethan at the very pinnacle of the castle. With a sudden, furious motion, she tore off her hat. In midair, it elongated and reshaped into a long-handled polearm. Elbaf's legendary spear, Weiguo. Gripping the hilt with both hands, she drew in the colossal strength of the giants, preparing to unleash her ultimate technique. Big Mom's slash unleashed the full might of her colossal physique. The blade arced across the sky in a blinding white curve, spanning nearly a kilometer from tip to tip. In an instant, the world seemed to turn to light, and then she drove that radiant edge straight at the Cake Castle. On the battlements, Helding, locked in fierce combat with General Shinkeli, stopped mid-strike. Fury lit his eyes as he shouted, "You haven't a right to wield such power, woman." But his words were swept away by the roar of steel and the thunderous gusts that heralded the blow. That slash alone could shear the castle clean in two. Below the onslaught, Nethan refused to flinch. He knew retreat meant certain doom not only for himself, but for Robin and the giant contingent arrayed beside him. As Big Mom's blade descended, its momentum howling through the air, Nethan drew in a steady breath and curled his right hand into a tight fist. The very space around his knuckles warped and twisted, reality folding in on itself. "Twisted fist!" he roared, driving his charge upward. The impact detonated like a second sun. Steel met flesh-shredding energy in a cataclysmic shockwave that rattled the sky and sent debris raining down around them. This was Nethan's second collision with Big Mom, and this time, neither would yield easily. Nethan's fist twisted through the air just as Big Mom unleashed her most devastating blow yet, and the two strikes met with cataclysmic force. The Grand Cake Castle, already buckled by their earlier skirmish, twisted apart in the impact. Tier upon tier of sponge and frosting sheared away, tumbling into the air in a blinding spray of crumbs and sugar. A searing flash lit the sky. On the shattered battlements, Oven, Daifuku, Katakuri, and the other commanders tried desperately to intervene, but the shockwave was too powerful. They scrambled for purchase on the crumbling remnants of the fortress, bracing against falling debris as its foundations gave way beneath them. Below, Marine reporter Morgan stood clutching his Den Mushi, its lens trained on the chaos overhead. Even he, seasoned in witnessing brutal battles at sea, could not hide the astonishment in his eyes. After all, this was no ordinary duel. It was a showdown between empires. Against the raw might of two Yonko, the supernovas and rookie pirates on deck felt no more threatening than children playing at war. With a final, thunderous crash, the lower levels of the Cake Castle collapsed entirely. Clouds of powdered sugar billowed skyward, while dozens of Big Mom pirates who had sought refuge behind sugar-glazed ramparts were engulfed in the ruin. The air trembled with the reverberations of absolute power, leaving the battered island of Totland stunned in its wake. On the castle's uppermost level, the senior officers staggered as each tier of flooring gave way beneath them. Struggling to regain their balance, they slipped one after another into the ruins below, carried off on the tide of shattered battlements and crumbling walls. Nethin forced himself to think clearly. You really shouldn't underestimate Big Mom. Below him, Robin drew on the power of her flower fruit. Dozens of arms sprouted from her back, merging seamlessly into a pair of enormous petal-like wings. For a heartbeat, she hovered in the air, straining her neck to watch Nethin and Big Mom dueling above. Not far away, the Rainwalker Shiryu strode across a shimmering moonlit surface that seemed to float above the chaos. Even as the cake castle collapsed around him, he remained unfazed, his pace unbroken. He couldn't deny that awakening the cold fruit had sharpened his abilities, but the gulf between himself and Nethin still yawned wide. Then came the final, earth-shaking crescendo. With a thunderous roar that echoed across the skyline, Nethin's great slash finally met its limit, releasing a shockwave so fierce it cracked the thick black clouds overhead. A jagged rift tore through the sky, as if some celestial blade had split the firmament itself. At its center, Nethin hung poised in midair. Wind blasted outward from the collapsing energies, whipping his obsidian cloak into frenzied motion, but the figure beneath it remained utterly unmoved, a silent sentinel against the storm. Could you please provide the full text of the chapter you'd like me to rewrite? Once I have the original machine-translated content, I'll revise it into coherent, idiomatic English and rename the main character to Nethin. Chapter 291, Big Mom's Strength. In just 2 exchanges, Nethin had already gauged Big Mom's true power. Her speed fell short of Kaido's, but her raw strength was every bit his equal. More dangerous still were her elemental techniques, thunderous shockwaves and gouts of flame born of her devil fruit, that gave her a fence and edge Kaido alone could not match. Yet against Nethin in his current form, that edge was slim. Big Mom's presence was overwhelming. From the moment she awoke, her body radiated monstrous power. Her ceiling of potential seemed boundless, as if some natural limiter had been shattered. She stood at the pinnacle of physical supremacy, rivaling even Kaido's legendary durability. Only in the realm of agility did she show a weakness, and her regenerative prowess, while formidable, still fell short of the dragon's. Nethin's eyes gleamed with cold calculation. He had seen enough to identify the decisive factor in their duel: speed. Despite Big Mom's near-monster constitution and fearsome attack repertoire, her slower movements gave him the opening he needed. If he could outmaneuver her, he could dictate the flow of the fight and emerge victorious. He squared his shoulders, gathering his spirit. Then, with a silent cry, Nethin sprang forward, determined to exploit the only chink in her armor. The battle that would shake the very foundations of their world was only just beginning. No one can ever promise total victory against one of the 4 emperors, and today is no exception for Nethin. All he needs is to tip the balance in his favor. Big Mom may be terrifyingly strong, but she lacks Kaido's immortal physique and can't outrun a decisive defeat. Once she's down, there's no coming back. With that in mind, Nethin summons the thundercloud beneath his feet and surges forward. Big Mom, though not the fastest foe he's faced, still reads his movements with uncanny precision. As Nethin closes the distance, she snatches the very storm cloud he's standing on, her arm crackling with electric arcs. In a single fluid motion, she hurls a devastating punch. Thunder roars. Her lightning-infused strike and her haki combine in a bone-jarring impact that rattles Nethin's arm. Still, he refuses to relent. Without even pausing to recover, he curls his other fist and slams it into her chest. Then another, 2, 3 rapid blows unleashed in perfect succession. His speed is staggering. Big Mom braces herself, wrapping both arms around the crackling storm to absorb the assault. She absorbs each blow head-on, but her slower footwork betrays her. Nethin's relentless barrage forces her to step back, arm joints creaking under the strain. Each thunderous collision sends shivers through the ground, but with every second that passes, the odds begin to shift, and Nethin intends to keep them that way. After more than 10 exchanges, Nethan was forced to cross his arms in front of his body, bracing for impact. Like a raging storm, he unleashed over a dozen punishing blows. Each strike warped the air itself, the shockwaves hammering against Big Mom's enormous arm. Beneath him, the thundercloud that had supported him splintered under the assault and collapsed. With a deafening crash, Big Mom hurtled into the shattered remains of the town below. Without missing a beat, Nethan's right fist clenched as a distortion field coalesced around it. He rocketed upward, hovering for a heartbeat before driving his fist straight down, his ultimate technique, the spear of twisting. Boom! The ground convulsed as if a magnitude 10 quake had struck Cake Island. Walls cracked, rooftops caved in, and the surrounding sea erupted in churning waves. When the tremors finally subsided, a vast crater hundreds of meters across yawned beneath him, looking every bit as if a meteorite had plummeted from the sky. At the bottom of the crater, Big Mom stood with her arms crossed over her head in a defiant stance. A few shallow scratches flecked her forearms, but they seemed little more than cosmetic damage. Slowly, she uncrossed her arms and fixed Nethan with a deadly serious gall. No anger, just an eerie, unflinching calm. Then, in a voice as cold as steel, she spoke. Earthfire! At her command, the fairy tale sun Prometheus, who hovered perpetually above her crown, burst into molten flame. In the blink of an eye, it detonated like a miniature volcano and condensed into a towering pillar of fire that streaked toward Nethan in the sky. Nethan's eyes flickered. Since when did a homie's attack require no charging time? He braced himself, then propelled his body in a sweeping arc, narrowly escaping the volcanic inferno's path. Even the greatest warriors are bound by the same physical laws. After unleashing a single all-out strike, or worse, several in rapid succession, the body inevitably demands a brief respite. No one can sustain peak power forever, not even legends like Kaido. After every explosive burst, there comes a momentary lull. Nethan was no exception. Prometheus and Zeus, Big Mom's very own homies, forged from her soul fruit, weren't slowed by that brief lull. Even after Big Mom detonated herself in a go-all-out explosion, those two constructs could keep striking, prolonging the danger long after her body's blast. No Yonko was truly weak, Nethan reminded himself, swallowing his lingering contempt for her. Yet even with every homie she could muster covering the aftershock, the battle's outcome wouldn't shift in her favor. Her true vulnerability lay in her ponderous speed and lack of finesse. Anticipating her next move, Nethan sidestepped the towering pillar of fire and blasted forward. He slipped in behind Big Mom's massive form and threw a solid punch at her back. But her observation haki had already predicted his attack. As she twisted, her right arm ignited with swirling flames and crackling lightning, all sheathed in hardened armament haki. Fire, thunder, and haki fused into a single, pulsing barrier, an electrified shield born of her will, meeting Nethan's fist with a thunderous boom. Nethan staggered back as their fists met, the impact stealing his breath, but only for a moment. In the next instant, he seemingly vanished and reappeared at Big Mom's flank. Without pausing to charge his power, he lashed out with a lightning-fast kick. Boom! Caught off guard, Big Mom could only bring her arms up in a crossed block. The blow rattled her defenses, and that was exactly what Nethan wanted. As she reeled, his eyes glowed with spatial distortion energy. One heartbeat he stood before her. The next, he was behind her, his fist driving into her spine. Boom! Big Mom unleashed her terrifying aura, desperately trying to retaliate, but Nethan's speed proved too erratic to anticipate. He pivoted and punched her squarely in the chest, sending her hurtling backward. Thunder rolled. Flames exploded. Before Big Mom could land, her two soul incarnations, Prometheus and Zeus, erupted in a twin assault of fire and lightning that engulfed Nethan. Rather than using his spatial warps to defend himself, he planted his feet and summoned his overwhelming armed body technique. Channeling raw, full-body power, he blasted straight through the crackling inferno. Go away, he roared, bursting free from thunder and flame and charging forward once more. A chill light flickered in Nethan's eyes. He flung his arms out to either side, and a wave of distorting energy tore through the thunderfire cloud. Prometheus and Zeus screamed as the force ripped them apart, shattering them into drifting fragments of cloud and flame. But even as they dissolved, the two elemental spirits, as if bound by some unbreakable fate, reformed in an instant, their bodies condensing once more with uncanny, seemingly immortal power. Chapter 292, Big Move, Illusory Sky Sword Formation, Part 4. Even as her Thundercloud and Firecloud guardians rose to shield her, Big Mom spun back into the fray with astonishing speed. Her massive form, with the weight and momentum of a steel cannonball, crashed toward Nethan, every step quivering with raw power. Nethan's kingly aura alone was enough to drive off ordinary fighters, but this was no ordinary attack. Prometheus and Zeus weren't mere minions, they were soul incarnations drawn from Big Mom herself. A cruel smile twisted her lips as she reached into the very essence of those two elemental beings, Thundercloud and Firecloud, donned them like living gauntlets and slammed both fists toward Nethan. Ordinary homies, conjured from the spirits of lesser souls, would have buckled under Nethan's overwhelming presence the moment they tried to intervene. But Prometheus and Zeus, spawned from Big Mom's own soul, were immune to his domineering aura. Not only could they fight alongside her, they possessed instincts and cunning of their own, striking as independently and ferociously as their mistress willed. As thunder and flame coalesced around her gauntleted hands, Big Mom let out a roar that shook the sky. In that instant, Nethan braced himself for the assault of two living elements, storm and fire, united in a single devastating blow. Nethan met Big Mom's lightning barrage head-on, his blade crackling as it absorbed the storm's fury. He sheathed the final bolt in a flash of steam, then eyed the remaining thunder constructs with cold amusement. "My conqueror's haki alone won't hold them forever," he murmured, "but they're hardly invincible." Even though the two lightning forms had reassembled after being dispersed by his blade, Nethan sensed their strength ebbing with each strike. Repeatedly shattering their cohesion would nearly destroy them, and without those electrified sentries to distract her, Big Mom herself would be far more vulnerable. He tilted his head, dark resolve flickering in his eyes. Nethan had been working on a few new techniques, and Big Mom's onslaught provided the perfect testing ground. After parrying her beam attack twice in rapid succession, he withdrew his sword in one fluid motion. "Shadow clone," he barked. In the next heartbeat, Nethan's form dissolved into thin air, then reappeared not once, but 4 times, each identical warrior taking up a position at the corners of an invisible square. At the center stood Big Mom, caught in the midst of these 4 mirrored assassins. Now the real test would begin. This isn't an illusion at all, but a distortion of space that lets Nethan occupy 4 positions at once. Imagine drawing 4 dots on a sheet of paper and then folding it so they all overlap. Big Mom's eyes went wide. All 4 Nethans were real. None were mere projections. They stood in the cardinal directions, identical in every detail, their gazes equally cold. Then, in perfect unison, they advanced. Phantom sky, sword formation. A deadly aura pulsed around them, like lightning cracking through a stormy sky. Big Mom's pupils contracted in shock. She had no time to dodge. Instinctively, she cocooned herself in thunder and fire, igniting her aura of domination to brace for the onslaught. But before she could strike back, the 4 Nethans were already upon her. It was only then Big Mom realized her mistake. You didn't need to track all 4 attackers. They weren't independent combatants, but spatial echoes of the same warrior. Combating a single Nethan was, for all intents and purposes, facing all 4 at once, because, in this warped space, they truly were one. Nethan's lips curved into a cold smile. He'd already guessed how Big Mom would react, and he was right. As she lunged, sword drawn, toward the last place he'd been, he vanished in a flash. Then, like an eerie mirage, 4 identical Nethans flickered into existence around her. "Laugh all you like," he muttered, each echo of his voice dancing on the edge of perception, "but you won't escape this." In an instant, the 4 Nethans unleashed a barrage of distorted energy slashes that ripped through the air itself. Reality quivered under the onslaught. The phantom blades sliced around Big Mom, encasing her in a halo of crackling fury, pinning her arms and torso like some iron-studded hedgehog. She let out a furious roar, muscles bulging, as she thrashed to break free, but the blows struck faster than she could react. At the height of the assault, all 4 figures converged their attacks on a single point, her left shoulder. Big Mom felt the world shudder as the concentrated strike tore through her legendary defense. Thunder rolled, fire flared, and layers of her near-indestructible armor cracked like brittle stone. In a heartbeat, her vaunted resilience was reduced to shattered fragments. She staggered back, the force of the blow driving her against the deck, her roar echoing into the sky. For the first time, Big Mom's indomitable strength faltered, and standing tall before her, the real Nathan reappeared, sword still humming with residual energy. His eyes were hard, unwavering. "You should have known," he said quietly. "No one weaves through my shadow." Silence reigned, broken only by the distant crash of waves. Big Mom glared, clutching her wounded shoulder, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The battle had shifted. Now, only one question remained. Would she rise again to face him? Or was this the end of her fearsome reign? Nathan's blow struck Big Mom's arm like the jaws of some monstrous beast. In an instant, flesh and muscle ruptured, spraying blood in a crimson arc, and the white gleam of bone showed through the wound. "Big Mom, she's been hit hard," someone gasped from the ranks. Owen and the other sweet commanders, though caught up in the chaotic brawl around them, couldn't tear their eyes away from the duel unfolding before Big Mom. They'd heard the rumors of this newcomer Nathan's power, but standing here, 20 minutes into a duel with the Pirate Empress, the red stain creeping across her sleeve told its own story. A gaping rent in Big Mom's arm, as if dozens of knives and spears had been driven through her in a single strike, defied everything they thought they knew. In all their years under Big Mom's banner, she'd never taken a wound this severe. Not from cannon fire, not even from the fearsome supernovas who threw themselves at her. Only once, when her treasured picture of the nun shattered, had she looked anything like this, stunned, wounded, vulnerable. And yet here she was, reeling from Nathan's ghostly attack. The strength of that ghost hand technique was beyond belief. Half an hour ago, Big Mom had laughed off even the mightiest assaults. Now she was glaring at Nathan, fury and shock warring in her bloodshot eyes. In that moment of staggering realization, Nathan stepped through the haze of battle, emerging directly behind Big Mom. His cloak fluttered, and in his hand the swirling energy of the ghost hand pulsed again, hungry for more. Big Mom whirled around, roaring with rage, but first she had to deal with the arm that throbbed dully where bone met torn sinew. The sweet commanders exchanged uneasy glances. Never in their wildest dreams had they imagined their fearsome captain could be cut so deeply, so easily, and they certainly never expected this young upstart to do it. Yet here he stood, an assassin in the making, or perhaps something even worse. The battle for Big Mom's arm was only the beginning. Now the real fight was about to begin. He braced himself against the hilt of his sword, sweat beading on his brow as he fought for breath. This was one of his newest techniques, an ability that distorts the surrounding space, and it was draining him almost to the point of collapse. Even though his power normally edged out Big Mom's by a hair, that slight advantage meant nothing when he faced Nathan's ultimate move. In choosing his defense, he'd picked the very worst option, and now disaster was inevitable. This assault was nothing like the instant slash, which required a visible charge-up and could be dodged by any foe with ki and perception. Instead, he first bent the battlefield's space to his will, fracturing reality itself so that he appeared in 4 places at once. Then, in a single seamless motion, each duplicate launched a series of horizontal and diagonal cuts. Countless blades of energy radiated toward one central point, like a hedgehog's quills converging on its prey. All of those strikes, unleashed in the span of a heartbeat, fused together in one cataclysmic burst of power. Nathan knew there was only one surefire way to deal with the onslaught. Pick a direction and go all out. Standing his ground and hoping to parry every incoming strike on the fly was the height of folly, an invitation to an irreversible, tragic downfall. Only by moving with inhuman swiftness, comparable to the legendary yellow ape, could he slip free or escape the blast radius before the blows stacked and detonated. Of course, this was Nathan's first time unleashing the technique in real combat, so it lacked perfect finesse. Had Kaido been even a fraction faster, he might have twisted out of its path at the last possible moment. Big Mom, however, simply couldn't dodge. Her sluggish speed was a fatal flaw. That precise weakness is why Nathan chose this attack. When you're executing a high-stakes maneuver, you use the one with the highest chance of success. Today's result spoke for itself. One clean, decisive hit. Chapter 293, Taking a Nosedive, Part 1. The situation was dire. From his vantage point, Big Mom's supreme commander, Katakuri, watched the battlefield grow more chaotic by the second. Nethan and Big Mom were simply too far apart for him to intervene, and even if he could reach them, there was no way he could tie down Shiryu of the Rain in time. Shiryu was no mere show. His razor-sharp swordsmanship, combined with the freezing power of his devil fruit, made him a lethal adversary. "Gum gum, soft rice cake!" Katakuri bellowed, tapping into his awakened mochi powers. The earth trembled as it transformed into a roiling sea of sticky mochi. Massive columns of mochi burst skyward, coiling around Shiryu's legs in an instant. With a silent hiss, Shiryu unleashed a wave of chilling frost that swept through the mochi pillars, shattering them like brittle porcelain. At the same moment, Katakuri charged toward Nethan, determined to protect his ally. But to his shock, the mochi beneath him froze solid in the blink of an eye. A spreading layer of ice shot outward from Shiryu's blade, cutting across the ground in all directions, an icy tide threatening to swallow everything in its path. Under the onslaught of Shiryu's arctic power, the impossibly sticky rice cake froze solid in an instant, snapping the bindings that had held Katakuri like glass. Shiryu of the Rain's eyes glittered with contempt. "You dare interfere in a captain's duel? You'll pay for that." With a sudden, fearless lunge, he swung his sword at Katakuri. The blade seethed with frost as it sliced through the air. Katakuri rolled aside, narrowly avoiding the strike, but Shiryu was already upon him, locking his arm, twisting him off balance, and creating an opening. The steel bit into Katakuri's side. Blood welled at the wound, only to freeze the moment it appeared. Tiny red crystals formed on his armor, shining ominously. General Samuji let out a horrified cry. "Mother!" He tore free from the fisherman who'd been restraining him and lunged forward to help Big Mom. But the fisherman's lightning-fast strikes made it impossible, far harder than Katakuri's own struggle against Shiryu. Shiryu didn't hesitate. He advanced, sword poised for another blow. "Remember this," he said, voice cold as the blade in his hand. "Never meddle in a captain's fight, or you'll face his wrath." In the blink of an eye, Fisherman reappeared in front of Smoothie. "Get out of my way!" Smoothie snarled, swinging his sword in a deadly arc. But Fisherman had already dissolved into an afterimage. As Smoothie's blade sliced through empty air, he darted to the side and unleashed a blistering kick straight into Smoothie's abdomen. The force was so fierce that, even though Smoothie slammed his sword down to block, he was still sent careening backward. Speed is power. Thanks to the Accelerate Fruit's ability to hasten time, Fisherman's reflexes and raw strength are extraordinary, and each kick strikes with bone-shattering impact. His only weakness is that he must absorb every ounce of recoil himself, an issue compounded by the fact that his build isn't as solid as Nethan's. That's why Fisherman seldom relies on close-quarters brawling. He usually uses his power to supercharge ranged attacks, like his signature coin bullets. As Smoothie tumbled through the air, Fisherman winced. His calf throbbed painfully from the follow-through of that last kick. Gritting his teeth, he drew his pistol and squeezed off 3 rapid shots at his airborne opponent. I've tightened the prose and smoothed out the grammar, but I noticed no Ross in this excerpt, so I'm not sure where to apply the renaming to Nethan. Could you clarify which character was originally named Ross, or share the portion where he appears? Once I know, I'll slot in Nethan and ensure he's presented as male. Here's the polished version of what you've provided. 3 slugs spat from the Admiral's pistol. Smoothie vaulted backward, evading 2, but the third caught her shoulder full on, shattering bone and flesh in one brutal strike. She sighed through gritted teeth. Instinctively, she twisted her arm, and in an instant, the gash sealed itself. This wasn't true regeneration, but her devil fruit power compressing flesh and sinew back into place, very much like Doflamingo's threads mending internal organs. From across the deck, Chef Longbread, one of Big Mom's generals, grinned and pressed his attack. He wouldn't let a single officer best him so easily, though he doubted the rest of the crew could hold out much longer. "Ding ding dong!" he called out, signaling to Hoshi Snag. Together they focused on Fujitora. Longbread's swordplay lacked flair, but his blade transformed anything it cut into food, forcing the Admiral to draw his weapon in defense. Spotting Smoothie's wound, Longbread's heart slammed in his chest. Something was terribly wrong. He ached to rush to her side, but between the two of them, containing Fujitora's power was all they could manage. Supporting Smoothie? Impossible. And their only other ally was too weak to help, not for a moment. Across the battlefield, Fujitora's eyes glowed violet as he raised his blade. He whispered a single word, and the world seemed to pulse with weight. Please let me know where Ross appears, or which character you'd like to become Nethan, and I'll integrate that change throughout. Fujitora's keen gaze swept the battlefield. He saw Nethan pressing his advantage against Big Mom, landing a crushing blow that sent her reeling. At the same time, Longbread and Snug, desperate to support their captain, surged forward, only to feel Fujitora's gravitational power descend upon them like a living weight. With a single strike of each blade, Fujitora pinned them in place. Their faces drained of color as they struggled beneath the immense force, forced to pool their strength just to remain upright. For a tense moment, even they were too occupied to watch Nethan's duel with Big Mom. Duty compelled them onward, however, and they fought against the pressure as though laboring under a mountain. No one dared enter Fujitora's domain. Any step into his gravity well brought instant paralysis. Only the likes of Governor Owen and General Xing could resist it even slightly. All other officers found movement nearly impossible. Meanwhile, a storm broke overhead. Thunder cracked across the sky as Hireding hefted his massive thunder axe and locked blades with General Singcracker. Lightning danced along the edge of Hireding's weapon, each swing met by the general's unbreakable defense in a duel of titans. The clash of metal and roar of thunder echoed across the deck, underscoring the chaos of the larger struggle around them. Cracker poured forth wave after wave of biscuit soldiers, but Hireding, wielding the power of his Thunderthomb Devil Fruit, cut through them effortlessly. When he saw Big Mom seriously wounded, Cracker's eyes narrowed, and he ordered his soldiers to flank Nethan, hoping to turn the tide of the duel. That was the last straw. With a deafening roar, Hireding let loose his fury. "You might not be able to slay that demon yourself," he bellowed, "but no one interferes with my captain's battle." He raised his voice even louder. 200 million volts, Thor. In an instant, lightning exploded across his colossal frame. Muscles bulged and his skin and even his clothes turned storm gray, crackling with white-hot energy. The Thunderthomb Fruit's power surged, torrents of electricity dancing up and down his body. Boom! He brought his axe down in a single sweeping arc, and in that instant, a waterfall of thunder roared out, crashing over a dozen nearby biscuit soldiers. The electrified troops crackled violently, their brittle forms charring and igniting in an instant. "Damn it!" Cracker snarled, watching Helding's relentless onslaught. He could no longer maintain control of the biscuit army supporting Big Mom, so he abandoned his puppets and lunged forward, blade held horizontally. But Helding was already gone. In the blink of an eye, he had swept aside the remaining soldiers, then reappeared before Croth, Caker with his axe raised. Lightning arced around its broad head in the shape of a hexagram, bright, violent, unstoppable. Boom! The thunder axe met Cracker's sword in a deafening explosion. Sparks flew as they locked blades, trading raw power stroke for stroke. For several breathless seconds, neither combatant gave an inch. Then, with a sudden burst of force, Cracker was driven backward. He stumbled off balance, purple hair singed at the tips, scorch marks mottling his armor. He had tried to stand toe-to-toe with Helding's thunderous might, and found himself outmatched. Helding seized the moment. Lifting the thunder axe high above his head, he roared, "The Spear of Elbaf! Weiguo!" Every sinew in his arms tensed as lightning coalesced around the haft, condensing into a single, all-consuming strike. There was no escaping the storm that followed. Cracker's face went pale as he staggered backward, summoning 5 biscuit soldiers to form a shield before him. But Nethan's strike cleaved through them like kindling, each clay guardian erupting in fiery shards before collapsing into smoldering ash. Boom! The aftershocks smashed into Cracker himself. He rushed to meet it with a desperate sword block, but the momentum was too great. His feet left the deck as the blow sent him flying, and he crashed down with a thunderous crack. He coughed, blood staining his teeth and armor. In that instant, Big Mom's famed defenses unraveled. None of her star commanders could rush to her side, and every line of support was severed. What had been a stalemate barely a half hour ago flipped in a heartbeat. The Big Mom pirates, once feared across the seas, were suddenly on the brink of defeat. Chapter 294. Destruction. Part 2. For a few stunned seconds, Big Mom reeled from the blow. Then, with a roar that seemed to tear the heavens apart, she unleashed a bestial scream so piercing it rent through the clouds, and with it, chaos erupted across the entire battlefield. Her tyrannical aura surged outward like a tidal wave, and even seasoned fighters such as Katakuri, the other sweet commanders, and the rain generals staggered under its force. Nethan, fresh from landing that crushing strike, felt his eardrums whine in protest. The sheer intensity of a Yonko's power, magnified by that unearthly howl, swept shamelessly across the island. He narrowed his eyes, flared his nostrils, and snorted coldly. In an instant, he activated his harem distortion. The roaring gale of Big Mom's scream collapsed inward, silenced around him, then focused on its target, Big Mom herself. A low, buzzing hum filled the air as the world itself seemed to constrict around her. Expecting her sound waves to erupt in every direction, the spectators held their breath, but Nethan's harem brutally suppressed them. Bit by bit, the scream was sealed away, confined to a 10-meter radius, and prevented from spreading any further. Silence descended, ominous, electric. On that hushed backdrop, only two figures remained, the fearless young warrior and the mighty Yonko he had dared to challenge. Nethan hovered in midair, muscles tense as he pressed one hand against the unseen barrier in front of him. With a flicker of his power, the void coalesced into a pearlescent dome that descended over Big Mom, trapping her inside. The chamber fell deathly silent, save for the horrific wail that resonated within the containment field. Even from outside, the sound was unbearable. Each scream bent and twisted as it ricocheted against the warped interior of the dome, creating overlapping reverberations so fierce they threatened to shred reality itself. Nethan's eyes flickered with alarm. He knew all too well that if those pressure waves escaped, they would obliterate everything within a 10-meter radius. But Big Mom herself seemed immune. She screamed on, unrelenting, her voice growing ever more frenzied. Through the transparent membrane, Nethan could see the air ripple and pulse, sound made visible, each crest and trough distorting the space around her. Even the stone floor beneath her feet shuddered, straining to absorb the assault. Nethan clenched his teeth. He had no choice but to hold the barrier, despite the mind-numbing pressure pushing back at him. Sweat beaded on his brow as he willed his power to remain stable, fingers trembling under the force of the sonic onslaught. One misstep now, and the collected waves would erupt in a cataclysmic blast. "Get back," he warned, voice echoing in the tense stillness. His gaze darted over the assembly of onlookers, soldiers, pirates, and civilians alike, urging them to retreat. Then, drawing a deep breath, he opened his mouth. It was time to end this. With resolve hardening in his chest, Nethan prepared to confront Big Mom's wrath with every ounce of strength he had left. Robin, Lafitte, and the others barely had time to react. At Nethan's warning, they tumbled back toward the edge of the clearing, while the rest of the Big Mom pirates, still staggering from the previous impact, stood frozen in place. Katakuri's eyes locked onto Nethan. For a heartbeat, they flickered with confusion. Then his pupils suddenly constricted, as if he'd glimpsed a gruesome vision. "Back! Fall away from Mother, and from that man!" he roared. His voice carried the weight of his reputation, second only to Big Mom herself, and galvanized the onlookers into a panicked retreat. Footsteps pounded the earth as crews scrambled to put distance between themselves and the two combatants. 1 second, 2, 3. Each tick of time stretched into an agonizing eternity for the circling pirates, their hearts hammering in their chests as they peered anxiously at Nethan and Big Mom. Dust swirled around their boots. The air thrummed with tension. 9 seconds. N. Then, as if a colossal dam had finally given way, all the suppressed sound waves that Nethan had been channeling exploded outward at once. The ground shuddered beneath their feet, incapable of containing the kinetic force. Boom! The shockwave ripped through the clearing, tossing up dirt and debris in a deafening roar that echoed across the island. Nethan's heart lurched as the earth around Big Mom fractured in a great web of cracks, the rupture racing outward before it even registered in his mind. He hadn't expected her roar to warp into something akin to a nuclear detonation. Instinctively, he poured every ounce of his armament hockey into the space before him, twisting reality in a desperate bid to shield himself and the onlookers. Under the horrified stares of everyone on Cake Island, the ground within nearly a kilometer of Big Mom's position collapsed as though a colossal meteor had struck. Buildings crumbled to splinters in an instant, and anyone caught too close, too slow, too weak, was torn apart by shockwaves that no longer sounded like mere sound. Those waves were pure, unleashed devastation, a sonic bomb that obliterated all in its path. As the thunderous aftershock rolled outward, a lone figure moved through the chaos. Shiryu of the Rain raised his blade, his sword intent, though invisible, radiating power. With one fluid arc, he cleaved the still ringing force of the blast in two, dispersing it before it could claim more lives. For a moment, silence reigned. Then the island's survivors, trembling in the ruins, realized they had been spared, if only barely, from utter annihilation. Fujitora's expression darkened. In a single, fluid motion, he slashed his sword through the air, and gravity itself obeyed him. The deck beneath their feet flipped on its side, instantly rising to form an enormous wall that checked the shockwave's forward momentum. Nico Robin, who'd been standing close by, darted immediately to Fujitora's side. Meanwhile, Luo activated his room ability and vanished, reappearing far from the blast center. Lafitte and the fisherman likewise slipped away in the confusion, each finding shelter well beyond the attack's reach. Even the towering figures of Helding and Rhodes, natural giants unshaken by most threats, felt the upheaval as the ground buckled beneath them. They lost their footing, bodies collapsing under the sudden shift, yet neither suffered lasting harm. The fate of the Big Mom pirates was far grimmer. Apart from Jiang Xing and a handful of mid-tier officers who'd managed to brace themselves, almost every underling was caught in the maelstrom. Some were torn apart on the spot. Others lay broken, coughing up blood, life slipping away between shattered bones and ragged breaths. When the air finally stilled and the magic dissipated, the true scale of the devastation was horrifyingly clear. Chapter Text: Aftermath of the Emperor's Clash. The wreckage of Cake Island stretched as far as the eye could see. Every building shattered, every street torn asunder. The very ground had been scarred by a titanic force, leaving cratered hollows and smoldering debris. Morgans and the others who'd fled alongside Robin watched it all in horror. They'd survived the battle between two of the Emperor-level pirates, but lived to witness this devastation. Their faces were pale with dread. Any closer, and they'd have been utterly annihilated. "Do you think Big Mom made it out?" Morgans whispered, voice tight. He swallowed hard, his reporter's bravado gone in an instant. The clash of Yonko was not a spectacle to be watched. It was a death sentence. In the wreckage's heart yawned a vast pit, its sheer walls glowing faintly from lingering heat. It stretched 1,000 meters across, like some giant's open maw. At its bottom stood two lone figures, so small against the devastation they looked almost like toys dropped into a sandbox. Nathan, once known as Ross, stood with his cloak in tatters, his clothes singed and stained. In his hand he gripped the demon knife, its blade still slick with soot and spatter of blue dye. A thin trail of crimson lingered at the corner of his mouth where a sudden blow had cracked his lip. Despite the damage, his eyes burned with fierce determination rather than fear. Opposite him, the monstrous form of Big Mom rose from the crater floor. Her once colorful attire was shredded, her hair matted and singed. She breathed raggedly, yet her towering frame still radiated an aura of unstoppable power. Between them lay the remnants of a battlefield worthy of legend, shattered rock, twisted steel, and echoes of clashing titans. Nathan straightened, pressing a hand to his bruised side. He'd miscalculated the scale of her wrath. Every instinct screamed to turn and flee, but he remembered why he'd come here, to save those under Big Mom's shadow, to prevent further slaughter. Drawing a shaky breath, he raised his blade. This was the moment that would decide more than just their own fates. It would decide the future of Cake Island itself. More than 10 meters away, the towering figure of Big Mom loomed, utterly drenched in blood. Almost no unmarked flesh remained on her body. She looked like a demon clawing its way out of hell. And yet she was still standing, her breathing ragged but undiminished. Go, hand. A hollow, unearthly voice hissed from between her shattered lips, echoing across the battlefield. Every ear within range trembled at the sound. Nithan's brow furrowed, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his calm expression, but he showed no fear. Skin wounds could be painful, even gruesome, yet they weren't usually fatal. Thanks to the steel balloon's protection, the fiery explosion that had struck her chest hadn't penetrated deeply. There had been no internal damage, and yet, somehow, every bit of her outer skin had been torn away. Blood gushed freely from every inch of her body. Big Mom didn't possess Kaido's infamous regeneration, and without the ability to heal quickly, she would bleed out in minutes. "You're finished," he thought. The devilish voice rumbled again, low and steady, as Big Mom's stained teeth clenched. She was far from defeated. She opened her scarlet eyes, glowing and blood-soaked, like a demon risen from hell. In an instant, her gaze locked onto Nethan, and with a fierce whoosh, she lunged straight at him. Chapter 295, The Runaway, Big Mom, Part 3. Boom, boom, boom. Blood caked Big Mom's armor as she unleashed every last ounce of strength and fury within her. A crimson aura flared around her, and she moved with a startling swiftness, still not quite on par with Nethan, but already outpacing even Kaido. Unfazed by her savage onslaught, Nethan tightened the fingers of his right hand, issued a low battle cry, and drove a thunderous punch into her midsection. For a heartbeat, their blows locked in a stalemate, each warrior bracing against the other's force. Then, with a roar that shook the deck, Big Mom twisted free. Her gargantuan, blood-soaked fist smashed through Nethan's guard, sending him hurtling backward across the burning planks. His spectral arm shattered against the hull and fell away. I could scarcely believe my eyes. Witnessing their captain's sudden, fearsome resurgence, the Big Mom pirates first felt their hopes sink. Then shock gave way to raucous joy. Big Mom had roared back to life with terrifying power, driving the mighty Nethan, the so-called Fifth Emperor, before her. Faster, stronger, resolved to sweep every challenger from her path. Nethan flipped himself upright in midair, locking eyes with Big Mom. She'd already absorbed blow after blow, enough to break any ordinary fighter, but she was no mere mortal. When an Emperor of the Sea is driven to the brink, every hidden reserve of strength awakens in a savage, unstoppable surge. He remembered Whitebeard dragging his mangled body across the battlefield, enduring back-to-back strikes from 3 Marine admirals, and surviving Red Dog's inferno that would have incinerated any normal man. Yet even then, Whitebeard scorched Red Dog in return and nearly finished off Blackbeard himself. The 4 emperors did not go down easily. Nethan's lips curled into a cold smile. Today, he vowed, he would carve his name into legend with the blood of a Yonko. Twisting fist, he roared, spiraling his aura into a concentrated, devastating punch. Gathering every ounce of his will, he lunged forward to meet Big Mom's titanic power head-on. Nethan's fist slammed into Big Mom's chest with a sickening crack. Blood spurted from her armor, painting the cavern walls a deep, dripping red. He stumbled backward, grinding his teeth against the surge of pain. His eyes glittered with savage intent. Again, he snarled and hurled himself forward. In the crucible of near death, warriors often unleash an overload burst, a final, desperate surge of power. Tonight, it was everyone's right. Boom! 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 3 concussive blasts tore through the sinkhole's depths, each echo shaking loose dust and stones. Big Mom, teetering on the edge of collapse, roared in fury rather than fear. Nethan understood the danger. When she raged like this, speed alone wouldn't win the day. He had to meet her brutality blow for blow. His legendary stamina resisted collapse. His body felt as unbreakable as forged iron, and his weapons gleamed with lethal precision. Combined with every scrap of battlefield knowledge he'd ever gathered, he had no room for doubt. Let her push him to the brink. He was ready to answer with his own cataclysmic might. Forcing Nethan into desperation, an impossible task when his spirit refused to bend. Fear was a luxury he had long since shed. Boom, boom, boom. The thunderous roars rolled up the sinkhole's walls, heralding the next explosive chapter of their battle. The full might of the 4 emperors was unleashed, and every earth-shaking blow made Cake Island tremble beneath their feet. At its center stood Nethan, locked in a brutal exchange with the berserking Big Mom. Despite being driven back with each strike, he refused to yield. Each wound he took only steeled his resolve, his eyes blazing with defiance. The Big Mom pirates, who had roared in triumph when their captain's opening salvo appeared to overwhelm him, now watched in stunned silence as their jubilation drained away. Viscount Katakuri and the other commanders exchanged grim looks. The realization was dawning on them all. Big Mom's boundless strength was draining away. Prospero, blood trickling down one side of his face, studied the battlefield from afar with a troubled expression. Their empress was running on fumes. Her current fury was an overcharged burst of power she simply could not sustain. If she failed to finish Nethan in this frenzied state, defeat would be inevitable. Ordinary crewmen might still cling to hope, but the true heavyweights knew the truth. Nethan stood firm against every desperate assault, matching her in strength and spirit. And that, Prospero understood, was the unthinkable turn none of them were prepared for. Katakuri's expression darkened as he shot a wary glance at Fujitora and the Marines arrayed before him. "Even if they wanted to help," he muttered, "there's no way they'd stand by and let us slip past Fujitora's forces to back Mother and finish off Nethan." A heavy silence fell over the gathering. In every mind lingered the unthinkable possibility. Big Mom might actually lose. No one dared speak it aloud, until Prospero, the eldest son, cleared his throat and spoke in measured, somber tones. "There is no other course," he began. "If Mother is defeated by the Phantom Hand, the Big Mom pirates are finished, and even if she manages to overcome it, what then if her wounds prove too grave to heal? Our end will come regardless. Only in the one scenario where she defeats the Phantom Hand without sustaining irreparable injuries can any of us hope to survive." He paused, eyes downcast. "Prepare yourselves. Our fate hinges entirely on the outcome of this duel between Mother and the Phantom Hand." Katakuri and the other commanders exchanged grim looks. There was no mistaking it now. Against Nethan's unstoppable power, Big Mom's victory seemed all but impossible. Furthermore, with such a grievous wound, even if Nethan could somehow overdraw his vitality reserves and actually defeat Big Mom, there'd be no one left to heal her afterward. And if Big Mom died, what would become of the Big Mom pirates? Stripped of their emperor's strength, the crew might endure in name alone, but without her to hold them together, they would splinter into oblivion. The era of the four emperors would end in chaos. On the battlefield, the duel pressed on without mercy. Big Mom's full-scale rampage hammered Nethan from every direction. She spewed torrents of flame, thunder roared at her command. Under each crushing blow, fresh wounds fissured along Nethan's flesh the moment they appeared, but his iron-bound resilience kept him upright. Still, the toll was staggering. His energy reserves melted away faster than ever before, even faster than during his legendary clash with Kaido. Briefly, he considered slipping away through a spatial rift to regroup. Yet with Big Mom in this berserk state, any attempt at retreat would be a trap. She'd tear open space itself to follow him, driving him straight into the waiting lines of Shiryu the Rain and the other lieutenants. Steeling himself, Nethan squared his shoulders. There was no turning back, not now, when the fate of an entire pirate nation, and perhaps the Grand Line itself, rested on this battle. He tightened his grip on his weapon, ready to withstand whatever Big Mom hurled at him next. The storm between an emperor and her hunter was far from over. Nethan knew that if he tried to run now, it would only end in disaster. Big Mom's lieutenants and captains were still holding the line, and the moment they regrouped and counterattacked, his forces would be wiped out. More important, he was no man who shrank from the fight and left his crew to face a rampaging Big Mom alone. The instant he let himself depend on others, he'd be bound by heavy chains, forever barred from rising to the top. Delegating routine tasks was one thing, but ceding ground in the heat of battle was unthinkable. This was a test of flesh and spirit alike. Even if Big Mom had fallen into a blind frenzy, Nethan refused to settle for mere stalling tactics. That had never been his way. He fixed his gaze on the blood-soaked pirate queen, her eyes her breath ragged, every ounce of reason drowned in madness. A cold spark lit in Nethan's eyes. This maddened state was exactly the opening he'd been waiting for. Chapter 296, Annihilation, Part 4. Boom, boom. Big Mom, drenched in her own blood, unleashed a relentless barrage of punches at Nethan, yet with reflexes faster than hers, he darted through the gaps in her assault, his form flickering like a wisp of smoke. Each time her colossal fists met empty air, the force still shook the ground, sending tremors rippling across Cake Island and unsettling every onlooker. As they clashed, Nethin quickly realized the truth of her condition. Big Mom had slipped into a berserk frenzy. In this state, her primal instincts guided her. She could sense and evade danger without hesitation. Even his deadliest techniques, like his instantaneous slashes, were anticipated and dodged by her savage awareness. But her madness carried a fatal weakness. Stripped of her rational mind, she could no longer strategize or exploit an opponent's weaknesses. She attacked purely on instinct, blind to any hidden trap or feint. Nethin's eyes gleamed with opportunity. In this form, he could unleash every trick in his arsenal without fear of being outmaneuvered or countered. Big Mom's mindless rampage would be her undoing, and Nethin intended to be the one to finish her. Nethin danced backward across the rubble-strewn field, narrowly evading Big Mom's hammering blows with inhuman agility. After slipping past 4 crushing punches in rapid succession, he brought his hands together at chest level, eyes colder than steel. In an instant, he backed away again, covering another 30 meters in a heartbeat. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the air. In Nethin's palms, his twisting energy surged and then erupted outward. This was no ordinary power. Even Beast Kaido at full strength would only hold a marginal advantage over him, and Big Mom in her overdrive state, her vitality artificially inflated, could barely outmatch Nethin by a hair. Now, at the very peak of his strength, he poured every last drop of his twisting power into his hands. The space around his palms warped into a living, translucent vortex, crackling with raw potential. But this was only the opening gambit. Big Mom charged, roaring like a thunderclap. Nethin sidestepped her colossal fist, its shockwave slamming into the ground where he had stood moments before, and shouted, "It ends now." Jet-black energy cloaked his outstretched hands, radiating an oppressive pressure so intense that blue veins snaked across his forehead. He was straining against his own limits to maintain this surge. Hum! The battlefield shivered as that dull, pulsating buzz rolled outward. The twisting vortex of power coalescing around Nethin's palms shrank in an instant, from nearly a foot across to barely a few inches. As the spiral spun tighter, the once translucent distortion turned a solid, dark gray, an eerie, tangible energy visible even without sight enhancements. "Now you die!" Big Mom roared, her voice a bestial snarl. Bloodshot eyes burned with scarlet fury as she charged without hesitation. She didn't pause to read Nethin's next move. Her only thought was to crush him. Nethin's spatial warping technique was useless now. The distortion power he'd stored had fully erupted into that compact vortex, leaving him no choice but to rely on raw agility. He ducked, weaved, and somersaulted aside as Big Mom's blows rained down. Boom, boom, boom! The pirate matriarch's fists struck the air like battering rams. Nethin sidestepped the first 2, only to feel a bone-jarring impact slam into his shoulder on the third. He was lifted off his feet and hurled backward, skidding across broken slabs of stone before crashing spine first into a crumbling wall. A stifled chorus of shock rose from the onlooking Big Mom pirates, their faces pale. "What is Ghost Hand doing?" one whispered. Another shook his head in disbelief. Even they, hardened members of her crew, had never seen Nethin, nicknamed Ghost Hand for his uncanny mastery of space, pushed so recklessly to the brink. High atop the ship's mast, Prospero, Oven, and Katakuri watched in tense silence as Nethin and Big Mom circled each other across the water. Moments ago, they'd been locked in brutal, head-on assaults, but now they'd abruptly shifted tactics, retreating and evading one another with almost uncanny poise. The gap between them was too wide for any observer to dash in, and the raw force of their clash distorted the air so completely that even hockey couldn't pierce it. All anyone could do was watch with the naked eye as ripples of power danced on the sea's surface. Prospero's eyes gleamed. "Is Nethin running low on stamina?" he murmured, "or is he deliberately baiting her, forcing her to chase him until she wears down?" Oven's low growl answered him. "We've never seen Mother gasping for breath," he said. "She just keeps unleashing fury after fury. And yet, she looks unsettled. They've exchanged blows dozens of times already. What's he doing that's so different?" A few paces away, Katakuri closed his eyes and channeled his observation haki. Where others felt only a blank void, he detected a faint turbulence swirling around the two fighters. He opened one eye, staring into the haze. "That ghost hand user," he whispered, voice tense. "He's gathering something in that maelstrom. I can't see exactly what. He's masking it within the chaos of his power, but he's clearly preparing for a decisive strike." "What should we prepare?" Katakuri's calm question cut through the tension, and Perospero and the others exchanged uneasy glances. Meanwhile, Big Mom's blast had sent Nethan hurtling into the shattered ruins. He sprang up the instant she crashed into the debris, palms pressed together before him. Between his hands, a gray-black vortex, no larger than an inch across, swirled with gathering intensity, its color deepening toward pure pitch darkness. Even the condensed haki on his palms was being drawn into that miniature maelstrom, squeezed into its void. "Ho, ho," Big Mom rumbled as she charged. Nethan vanished into the air with a rapid series of moonsteps, evading her massive swing, but she simply soared after him on her thundercloud, relentless. With every movement, an oppressive weight bore down on him, testing his stamina. He ducked beneath 2 more blows, then thrust a foot forward, only to connect with Big Mom's fist in midair. The impact flipped him end over end, and he crashed into the ground below. Boom! The earth buckled and split, a network of cracks over 10 meters wide fanning out from his point of impact. Perospero and the other Big Mom pirates could barely contain their excitement. Just as Big Mom dove from the sky, claws outstretched for another crushing blow, Nethan, momentarily buried beneath the shattered earth, erupted from a wide fissure. The strange vortex that had hovered between his palms was gone. He'd managed to summon it once before, of course, but there was a world of difference between drilling through drills and guns in training and pulling off the same feat in the heat of battle. Nethan rose onto the rubble, utterly calm, his gaze steady like a motionless pond, as Big Mom bore down on him. Slowly, deliberately, he spread his hands. From one palm drifted a small, pitch-black orb. Orb hardly captured its true nature. It was more like a gouge in reality, twisting space into an unknowable shape. No matter how you looked at it, it defied geometry. All that remained was an overwhelming sense of chaos. Big Mom swooped closer, eyes blazing. Without breaking his serene expression, Nethan took a single, measured step backward, and in the next heartbeat, he vanished, reappearing hundreds of meters behind her. The battlefield fell silent for a fraction of a second, every pirate and crewmate straining to see what would happen next. Nethan watched Big Mom's charge with cool detachment. As the colossal figure hurtled toward him, she let out a strange, instinctive warning, a low, urgent sound, then twisted to dodge the floating black sphere that hovered in front of Nethan. Even as she avoided it, her momentum carried her still racing for him. Calmly, Nethan raised his right hand. Thumb touched middle finger, then index, a precise, ritualistic gesture. In an instant, the air around Big Mom rippled and contracted. She vanished from sight, only to reappear hundreds of meters away, planted squarely before the ebony orb. Big Mom's urgent cry turned into a roar of confusion. For a heartbeat, she staggered, as if awakening from a trance. Then, as if some tether snapped, space itself reversed. She flickered again and rematerialized exactly where she'd been moments before, still hurtling toward Nethan and toward the sphere now planted directly in her path. Nethan relaxed his fingers. His gaze never wavered. "Annihilation," he whispered. At the sound of that word, the black sphere fractured. Cracks raced across its surface until it exploded in a silent flash, shattering into shards of pure destructive energy. The shards surged outward, and the world seemed to tremble at the raw force of its release. Chapter 297, Big Mom Die. A crisp crack split the air like tempered glass shattering. Nethan looked up just in time to see a thin white fissure appear at the heart of the swirling black sphere overhead. In an instant, that crack raced to the edges of the orb, tearing it apart from within. Boom! A blinding white flash engulfed the sky. It felt as though a star had collapsed at point-blank range, or a nuclear bomb had detonated directly above Cake Island. Every fighter on the ground instinctively clamped a hand over their eyes, but the brilliance was relentless, bathing the world in searing light until it seemed nothing but a vast, featureless white expanse. When the radiance finally faded, Nethan risked a glance. Where the sphere had hovered, the island's surface had collapsed into a yawning pit hundreds of meters across. Every tree, every building, even the earth itself, gone, as if erased by some invisible force. No scorch marks, no debris, no echo of an explosion, only an impossible void. A collective gasp rose from the assembled warriors. Nethin's heart pounded as he stared into the chasm, disbelief painted on every face around him. At the very center of the abyss stood Charlotte Linlin, Big Mom, her immense silhouette framed by the crater's ragged edges. Not a hair was singed, not a scrap of clothing torn. She surveyed the devastation with a cold, triumphant smile, utterly unbowed. Nethin's blood chilled. Despite the utter annihilation all around her, Big Mom lived, and worse, she was ready for more. No strike in the world could make one of the four emperors, with a body twisted like a demon's, simply vanish into thin air. Yet that was exactly what had happened to Big Mom. Her once formidable form lay in ruin. Not a single patch of unspoiled flesh remained, and in countless places only bleached bones jutted out. No blood, no muscle, just the withered husk of a corpse. The Black Sphere's detonation had drained every drop of life from her, leaving only fragments behind. Miles away, at the very lip of the cavernous sinkhole, Rhodes stood with a ghostly pallor. Remarkably, his body bore no lasting wounds, or they had already healed beyond trace. The blast's reach had been staggering. Nethin stared at Big Mom's shattered remains and murmured to himself. Unleashing annihilation had meant pushing his distortion power to its absolute breaking point, yanking her back to her original stance. The effort had overloaded him. He hadn't managed to escape the blast's epicenter entirely, though he'd scraped himself out to its far edge. Fortunately, the chaotic energy of annihilation inherently counterbalanced the destabilizing pull of his distortion. He'd felt the backlash, but not so much that it would spell his end. What's the point of being undone by your own tricks? Lose your mind, and you're already dead. Nethin stood upright, gazing calmly at Big Mom's fallen form. He opened his eyes slowly, every bit the picture of collected resolve. In any rational battle, no one among the four emperors would have granted a foe that much time to charge an annihilation, nor offered a last-ditch chance to escape. But Big Mom, mad, disoriented, heedless of strategy, had thrown all caution aside. A cold, mechanical voice echoed in his mind. System reward. Bounty claimed, 1.9 billion berries. Target, Charlotte Lynn, Big Mom, one of the four emperors. Rewards, 150 talent proficiency points, 2 free talent points. The delayed notification rang out without emotion, acknowledging Nethin's extraordinary feat, defeating a Yonko, a triumph that surpassed every hunt he'd ever undertaken. He closed his eyes, drawing in slow, steady breaths as he began to restore the vast reserves of stamina his annihilation had drained. Below the cliff's edge, Big Mom's lifeless body finally relinquished its grip on the rock face. With a thunderous splash, it plunged into the fetid, fish-scented mud at the bottom of the chasm. And at the same time, across all of Cake Island, every homie born of Big Mom's soul fruit suddenly went limp. Our consciousness snuffed out in an instant. The members of the Big Mom pirates froze in stunned silence as they realized the enchanted soldiers at their feet lay motionless, eyes closed, utterly devoid of life. Moments later, one by one, the homies began to stir. But when they opened their eyes, shock and disbelief registered on their faces. Every single soul soldier had vanished. The power of the soul fruit had been nullified, an impossible feat. And if that were true, it meant the unthinkable. Big Mom, one of the four emperors of the sea, had finally fallen. No, this can't be happening, a pirate murmured, shaking his head as he stumbled backward. He forced a crooked smile that didn't reach his eyes. Big Mom defeated? It's absurd. Lord Katakuri, tell me this isn't real. Lord Katakuri stood unmoving, his expression as cold and unreadable as stone. Since the moment the blinding white light swept the island, all warmth had drained from his features. He said nothing, his silence more ominous than any denial. Nethin stared at the distant horizon, frustration burning in his chest. Between Rhodes's overwhelming interference and Big Mom's unpredictable rampage, he couldn't see or foresee what was happening on the battlefield. The moment that blinding white flash erupted, he knew it was over. He'd suspected Rhodes of preparing some devastating trump card, but Big Mom was out of control, utterly irrational, and no plan could contain her in that state. And from so far away, even if he could conjure up the strength of Rain's legendary Shiryu technique, it wouldn't be enough to bridge the gap. The Big Mom pirates were finished. Back on Totoland, Katakuri's hand loosened on his weapon. His eyelids dropped, exhaustion and relief mingling in his expression. In his eyes, Nethan's strength alone had been enough to suppress Big Mom, but it was more than raw power. Nethan's battle instincts were flawless, disciplined, methodical, merciless. He had fought like a master strategist, using his formidable haki to probe every crack in Big Mom's defenses and exploit her frenzied irrationality. Piece by piece, he dismantled her until her final blow landed, and she fell. No injustice here. Big Mom, is she dead? High above the island's edge, Morgan sat aboard his peculiar aircraft, its wings pulled by countless seabirds, and hovered jutside Cake Island. From this lofty vantage, he trained his binoculars on the battlefield below. When he finally lowered them, the shock in his eyes would not fade. Big Mom lay still. The Yonko, who had ruled the New World for nearly 20 years, was dead. Morgans had expected the Ghost Hand pirates to triumph. He knew their fighting style all too well by now, but he never imagined they would kill an emperor. The world, he realized, would be rocked by this news. What storms would these ripples set in motion tomorrow? How far would the shock travel across every sea? Nearby, Admiral Fujitora gazed down at Big Mom's motionless form. The indomitable presence was gone, and even his normally unshakable conviction wavered. In a low voice, he admitted, it happened faster than anyone anticipated. A short distance off, Shiryu of the Rain took a long drag from his cigar. With a steady hand, he drove the blade of his second-generation guillotine sword into the ground, hiding the turmoil roiling behind his calm exterior. In moments like these, none of them could truly stay composed. Not even the Ghost Hand pirates could stay calm. Those who had followed Rhodes from the very start, men like Lafitte and Trafalgaro, stood there staring in disbelief. "Big Mom's really dead?" murmured the fisherman, his voice barely more than a whisper. He remembered how Rhodes once bragged he'd overturn the seas. It had sounded like a joke back then. Yet here Rhodes stood, having slain one of the 4 emperors in her own territory. That faint, confident smile that always played on the fisherman's lips now shone with a fierce certainty. If anyone asked him now whether he regretted joining the Ghost Hand pirates, his answer would be, absolutely not. With Big Mom finally down, Shiryu of the Rain let out a slow plume of smoke. His eyes drifted to the remaining Big Mom pirates massed in the distance, a feral light flickering in his gaze. He cracked a sharp grin. "All right, let's start cutting them down." At his signal, Trafalgaro and the others turned from the wreckage and refocused on the enemy ranks. Trafalgaro hefted his demon sword, tilting his head as he issued the order. "We spare only Katakuri and Bu Ling. Everyone else, no prisoners." That had been Captain Rhodes's plan from the start. Katakuri and Bu Ling were to be taken alive at all costs. The rest of Big Mom's officers could fight tooth and nail for their lives, but if they fell, so be it. In the heat of battle, mercy was a luxury afforded only to the overwhelmingly victorious, and Rhodes had already sealed this fight's outcome. Fisherman let a cold smile ripple across his lips. Before anyone could react, he blurred into a ghostly afterimage and darted toward the nearest Big Mom pirates. With a casual flick of his wrist, a storm of razor-edged coins whistled into the air, each one spinning like a deadly shuriken. Fisherman's assault came in a blur, so fast it sounded like the crack of a cannon breaking the sound barrier. He hurtled forward with the weight and force of an actual cannonball. At the very same moment, Shiryu of the Rain and the others sprang into action, their movements perfectly synchronized. Together, they slammed into the Big Mom pirates' ranks, their combined momentum crushing everything in their path. Katakuri, watching their relentless advance, lowered his gaze. A faint spark lit his eyes as he surveyed the terror on the faces of his younger brothers and sisters. Steeling himself, he raised his voice above the chaos. "Fall back! We can't win this! Withdraw immediately!" His command cut through the panic like a blade. The Big Mom pirates, shaken but still clinging to life, found a flicker of resolve in his words. Dying here held no honor. Living to fight another day was all that mattered. "Retreat," Pelospero snarled, gripping his candy cane staff. He thrust it toward the western shore, where their fleet awaited, and the entire force began to pull back in orderly flight. The whole Big Mom pirate crew broke and ran, sprinting toward the western shore in a desperate bid for survival. There wasn't a soul left who felt capable of fighting, only the instinct to live. Yet in all that chaos, none truly escaped. As the others fled, one figure stood his ground. Katakuri fixed Nethan and the allied fishermen with a steely gaze as they tried to back away. Someone threw a handful of coins at him, an insult, an apology, a bribe. He didn't flinch. He merely let the coins clatter to the sand at his feet. Pelospero, his younger brother, paused mid-flight and glanced back. Katakuri didn't look at him. Calmly, he spoke over his shoulder. "We can't all retreat. Someone has to stay behind and slow them down. Pello, make sure the others get clear." Pelospero froze. Winded and wide-eyed, he hesitated. Then, voice rough with suppressed emotion, he whispered, "I understand." Without another word, he turned and rejoined the fleeing crew. "Brother Katakuri," Bray shouted, chest heaving. Even knowing Katakuri's plan, the sight of him alone on the beach was unbearable. "Why are you staying? Don't let this be the end for you." Pelospero's face twisted in anguish. He clenched his fists and bellowed at Bray and the other stragglers. "Hurry up! We can't waste any more time, or all of this will have been for nothing." But Katakuri didn't move. As the last of the pirates disappeared down the shore, he melted into the gathering crowd of Nethan's forces, a solitary guardian holding the line in their stead. Shiryu of the Rain and the other scabbards closed in on Katakuri all at once, overwhelming him before he could react. Even a fighter as formidable as Katakuri, one who could glimpse into the future, had no answer for a coordinated assault of this scale. With a low grunt, Admiral Fujitora twisted his cane and intensified his gravity hockey. Katakuri's feet stuck fast to the deck. Before he could free himself, a fishman warrior sprang in with a bone-crushing kick that sent him tumbling head over heels. No sooner had he recovered than a samurai swordsman slashed through the air, freezing Katakuri solid in a block of ice. "This one's mine," Fujitora said softly, tapping his cane. "The rest of you, pursue the Big Mom pirates." Shiryu and the others bowed and sprinted off, leaving Fujitora alone with their captive. Steam hissed as the ice crackled. In an instant, the brittle shell shattered, and Katakuri slumped to one knee, blood trickling from his mouth. Still, his glare burned with unshakable resolve. Summoning the power of his awakened mochi-mochi fruit, he stomped the ground with both feet. "Mochi! Waves!" he bellowed. A rippling tide of sticky, glistening mochi surged outward, steam and debris flying in its wake. As Nethan activated his Nuo fruit ability, the earth within 100-meter radius rippled and congealed into a mass of sticky, writhing rice cake. The gelatinous terrain surged outward, ensnaring Shiryu of Rain and the others in its grasp. At that moment, Helding transformed into a bolt of lightning, streaked through the void, and vanished from sight in an instant. Shiryu of Rain let out a low sigh, raised his hand, and slashed downward with his sword. The blade carved through the rice cake earth, freezing and shattering it where it struck, but only around him. Everyone else remained trapped by the relentless wave. Fujitora stepped forward, his gravity blade tapping the ground. A crushing force radiated outward, pressing down on Katakuri's body and pinning him into the sticky earth. Undeterred, Katakuri squared his shoulders, determined to hold them all off alone. Fujitora spared him a respectful nod. His courage and resolve were unquestionable. But a bounty exceeding 1 billion berries marked Katakuri as a war criminal. Towns razed, countless lives lost. Defending one's family was honorable, Fujitora knew, but his duty to justice was absolute. "Katakuri," Fujitora said, his voice calm but firm, "your bravery is undeniable, yet courage does not erase your crimes." Katakuri met the Admiral's gaze and let out a resigned sigh. He understood, in that instant, that there was no way past Fujitora's unwavering resolve. Nethan gritted his teeth. There was only so much he could do. Silently, he sent a signal to Pelospero and the others, then lunged forward, molding his devil fruit power into a massive mochi fist. With a thunderous boom, he slammed it straight at Admiral Fujitora. Fujitora responded instantly. His purple blade struck the mochi fist, and he pressed down with crushing gravitational force, pinning Nethan's strike in midair. Even though Nethan could foresee Fujitora's next move, there remained a gap. Fujitora's raw strength outmatched him. No matter how fiercely Nethan fought, at best he could level the playing field. He could never overpower the Admiral. Before Nethan could recover, Fujitora unleashed his own assault. Crackling arcs of electricity danced around the Admiral, as he tapped the full potential of his Thunder fruit. In a blink, he assumed the form of a towering giant. With arms outstretched and a low, resonant roar, he drew the crackling currents into a single colossal sphere, tens of meters across, floating between his hands. And then, with overwhelming force, Fujitora hurled the roaring thunderball into the heart of the Big Mom Pirates' battle formation. The deck shook under the impact, sending splinters flying as the lightning sphere detonated in a blinding flash. Nethan steadied himself, ready for whatever came next. Seeing the thunderball's devastating power, the Big Mom Pirates recoiled in terror. "Damn it!" Cracker snarled, desperation etching his features as he spun on his heels and thrust his arms forward. In an instant, biscuits materialized around him, coalescing into a solid shield. He layered it with his overwhelming armament haki, and the hardened biscuit barrier took the full foe. Arse of Helding's Blow. Chapter 299. The World Staggers, Part 3. After parrying Hyrding's blow, Kelija tried once more to flee, but in the blink of an eye, Hyrding vanished and reappeared amid the crowd. His entire form ignited with lightning, tendrils of raw power sweeping outward and engulfing more than a dozen pirates in an instant. 100-million-volt thunder shackles, Hyrding roared. 7 or 8 crewmen writhed on the deck, their armor and flesh blackened by the searing electrical onslaught. Kelijia's teeth ground together. With a savage cry, he slashed at Hyrding. His jet-black blade spun like a cyclone, arcs of lightning crackling along its edge, the technique known as the jet-black gale. The furious whirlwind of steel and electricity hurtled straight for Hyrding. Hyrding didn't flinch. His eyes narrowed at the approaching blade. With a casual twist of his wrist, he condensed a massive thunder axe out of the storm-charged air. The weapon crackled with raw energy as he brought it crashing down. Boom! The deck shuddered under the impact, a thunderous boom echoing over the chaos of battle. Sparks flew in every direction as blade met axe, and the true fury of their clash lit up the sky. With a thunderous roar and a blinding flash, Cracker exploded from the heart of the crackling lightning, attempting to strike and then fall back, but Helding's enormous frame moved with unthinkable agility. In a heartbeat, he was on Cracker's heels, driving him steadily backward under the sheer force and speed granted by his thunder fruit. Nearby, Kelijia fared no better. She was utterly trapped by those same electric currents, forced to devote every ounce of her energy to parrying Helding's relentless assault. Just then, Shilyu of the Rain, fishermen, and their strike team plunged into the fray, cutting down the scattered remnants of the Big Mom Pirates. Overwhelmed, the pirates broke and fled, turning the brutal stand encounter into a one-sided chase. Below, Gertz, who had held position on the ship, leaped ashore and sprinted straight for the yawning sinkhole at Cake Island's center. "Captain!" she cried as she skidded to a halt at the precipice. There, Rhodes stood unwavering, one hand resting on the demon sword Murasame. Rhodes inhaled deeply, calling upon her healing fruit. A soft, golden orb of light blossomed from her chest and danced above them for a moment, then arced forward and settled over Nethan's battered form. The glow wrapped itself around him, seeping into torn flesh and fractured bone. Within seconds, wounds closed, bruises faded, and Nethan's ragged breaths evened out. Proof that Rhodes's power, tempered by unwavering resolve, could truly turn the tide of battle. You arrived just in time. With the healing fruit's power finally at work, Nethan let out a long, shuddering breath. He'd managed to absorb and deflect much of the annihilation blast himself, and his innate regeneration had closed his worst wounds, but his strength was all but gone. Channeling overload had left every muscle locked in exhaustion. That was why he hadn't pursued the remaining Big Mom pirates. He simply lacked the energy to press on, and full recovery would take time. Fortunately, Gorze's healing fruit changed everything. It wouldn't restore him to peak condition in an instant, but it could dissolve the deepest fatigue and replenish enough vigor for him to move again. Nithan closed his eyes and drew a slow, steady breath, welcoming the warmth that seeped through his body. When he opened his eyes moments later, he felt markedly stronger. He hauled himself from the sinkhole, crossed the scorched ground in a few swift bounds, and emerged at the surface. Nodding gratefully to Gorze, he straightened, shoulders squared, and took another determined step forward. Whoosh! Nethan appeared in a flash of warped space and landed squarely amid the clash between Admiral Fujitora and Charlotte Katakuri. The towering Mochi warrior was already on the back foot, Fujitora's gravity blade bearing down on him relentlessly. "Twisted sword," Nethan called, his voice steady. In a single fluid motion, he swung his sword in a lethal arc toward Katakuri's exposed back. The big brother pirate had anticipated an intrusion, but with Fujitora pressing him from the front, he was trapped. Katakuri bellowed, throwing every ounce of strength into parrying Fujitora's descending blade and twisting his body away. Still, Nethan's strike wasn't a lone thrust, but a sweeping slash designed to cut off any escape. A thunderous crack sounded as the distortion energy in Nethan's blade struck Katakuri full force. The Mochi man's massive form collapsed into a lump of quivering dough and skidded across the deck, blood trickling from the corners of his mouth. Without pausing to gloat, Fujitora lifted his sword staff and summoned a sphere of crushing gravity. With a hum, the blade of weighted light lunged forward, leaving Katakuri no avenue of retreat. Nethan vaulted back, just as Katakuri crumpled to the deck, Fujitora's gravity blade still hovering beside him. A jagged crater yawned where he'd fallen, blood spurted from his lips. With Fujitora holding Katakuri down, Nethan didn't linger. He darted across the battlefield, scouring for another opening. He found it behind Cracker, who was locked in a fierce struggle with Hilding. The two circled each other, swords clashing in rapid succession, Hilding's blade flashing, Cracker's biscuit body refusing to yield. Cracker shot his eyes toward Nethan and froze for an instant of disbelief. "You again," he snarled. In that heartbeat, Nethan's boot drew in a swirl of dark air, armament hockey gathering like a storm. Before Cracker could react, Nethan's hardened foot slammed into the biscuit shield Cracker had formed on his back. Even infused to its limit with Busashoku Haki, the confectionery armor shattered under the impact, shards raining down. Cracker doubled over. Nethan followed through, driving his foot into the middle of Cracker's back with bone-crushing force. A thunderous boom echoed across the battlefield as Cracker hit the ground, winded and broken. Hilding staggered back, sword lowering in surprise. Nethan withdrew his foot slowly, armament sheen fading, and locked eyes with Cracker, ready to press his advantage. The tide of battle was shifting, and Nethan intended to ride it all the way. Cracker hurled himself at Hilding, slashing wildly with his sword, even as blood spurted from his mouth. Hilding planted both feet, gripping his Thunder Giant axe. His face darkened, but he refused to yield. With a guttural roar, he met Cracker's blade head-on. Boom! A crackling arc of lightning burst from the impact, showering sparks in every direction. Hilding staggered back, but Cracker's momentum carried him forward, and he tripped over a stray rock. He crashed to the ground, his body pinned and throbbing with electric numbness. A fierce laugh escaped Nethan's lips as he stepped forward and drove his sword through Cracker's chest. The kill registered instantly, bounty 860 million Bailey. The system awarded him 60 talent proficiency points and, to his surprise, 1 free talent point. It was Nethan's first confirmed pirate kill in the 800 million to 1.2 billion range, and already his second victory at that level. Today, luck had clearly sided with him. Nethan surveyed his rewards with a wry smile. In the wake of Big Mom's defeat, he'd already claimed 3 free talent points, and when you added the 3 he'd banked earlier, that brought his total to 6. His talent proficiency had soared too, 210 points and still climbing. But after jumping through dimensional rifts one time too many, wounding Katakuri so badly that he staggered and slaying the Kelegia beast, Nethan's reserves had finally run dry. He stood motionless on the charred battlefield, every muscle burning with fatigue. Off in the distance, Shiryu of the Rain and the rest were still locked in combat with the remnants of the Big Mom pirates, but Nethan knew he couldn't move another inch. He summoned Gears with a single gesture. Within moments, the massive, armored figure strode up to him. Nethan vaulted onto Gears's broad chest and sat, panting. His clothes and even his cloak had been shredded in the chaos. Left with nothing but raw skin, he had used his light distortion ability to weave a simple black covering over himself. "Take me back to the ship," he croaked. His voice was hoarse but firm. Gears nodded and turned, every step thundering across the scorched earth. Nethan leaned back, letting the world blur as they moved. He'd given all he had on this mission, but the hunt wasn't over, not while endless sea beckoned with fresh challenges. For now, though, he would rest and let his talents and his body recover. Tomorrow, he'd push onward. Gertz's fingertips brushed Nethan's arm, and in that instant she was reminded how small and fragile he truly was, no more than a little human in her giant-sized world. She let out a soft, amused sigh, then straightened her posture and with a thunderous step strode toward the shoreline. Even if there were still echoes of suspense around Katakuri's fight, now that Big Mom lay defeated, the outcome had already been decided. The moment Rhodes fired again, his shot would find its mark, shattering Katakuri's headgear and leaving no doubt as to who would emerge victorious. 18 years into the Great Pirate Era, the seas bore witness to an event thought impossible. Charlotte Linlin, Big Mom herself, had fallen in a climactic duel against the Ghost Hand pirates. In the days that followed, the news spread like wildfire across every ocean lane and island port. Silence fell over countless mouths, hearts pounded with equal measures of shock and excitement. By conquering Big Mom, the Ghost Hand pirates had upended the long-standing balance of the four emperors and claimed Yonko's status for themselves. The old order was shattered, and a new era of upheaval, and perhaps even greater peril, loomed over the New World. No one could have imagined that the era of the five emperors would collapse in under 2 years. Then, from the shadows, a fallen emperor reemerged, and the once feared Big Mom pirates were utterly destroyed. The balance of power in the New World has shifted once more. Welcome back to the Age of the Four Emperors.